I don't think it's a good idea for you to play tomorrow, Reggie. Reggie, Achilles Royce, looked up at the man who had been taking 15% of his earnings for the last decade and snorted. When had Darren ever told him not to go out there and make money? Not making bank was antithetical to his career, as well as Reggie's nature. Just because it was going sour a little now, didn't mean they couldn't churn this cream into cheese and bring it all around again. Shouldn't play? Darren, why wouldn't I play? We've got to ride this press for as long as we can. That's just it, Reggie. I know I say that all news is good news, but this news stinks, and you know it. If you got out there tomorrow, then you're going to ruin what's left of your reputation. Coach Anderson has already agreed to let you warm the bench for the last 3 games, so this can all blow over. He's even agreed to pay you out for the season, something that doesn't happen often. You need to lay low so that all this can just blow over. Maybe try again next season. Reggie stopped himself, just short of tearing the Velcro strap on his glove. He was used to dealing with the rage by now. He'd been managing it in his injections for years, but sometimes it still crept up on him. Times like now, when he needed a cool head. Reggie put his hands in his lap so that Darren couldn't see him shaking, but his manager was no fool. Are you still juicing, kid? I thought we talked about walking that back, especially with your upcoming "It's fine," Reggie half growled. I've got it under control. I'm 3 home runs away from breaking the all-time record, Darren, but I'm also staring 40 right in the face. If I hang it up now, I might never pick it up again. I want to go out on top, man. I don't want to just be a footnote who came close but never made it all the way. Darren sighed, looking away as he weighed his options. It had been hard for both of them this year. The home run race was nothing new. Players chased it every year, but most never came close. Achilles was closer than anyone had been in half a decade, but the closer he got, the closer people looked. You can't have another wife beater or steroid junkie on a Wheaties box, and fortunately, Achilles had fewer skeletons in his closet than most. Darren knew about the juicing, but Reggie said he was being careful. It was never enough to pop on a test, but it was enough to keep him active. Reggie should have retired a few years ago, but he couldn't. Not until he broke the record. Once I break the home run record, I'll hang it up. Till then, I'm in it until I can't anymore. One day, Achilles will be the name they all want to wear on their jerseys, even after I can't swing a bat anymore. Achilles, Darren almost laughed. He'd given the kid that name after he'd signed him. You need a marketable name, Reggie, and the league is full of notable Reggies. Why not try something classic? Achilles, maybe. It's got panache, don't you think? He had called him that because the kid was an all-around unit. He'd been 25, in the best shape of his life, and he could hit just as well as he could run. Darren had been his manager for nearly 10 years, and if there was a cash cow, it was this kid. Kid? No, not a kid anymore. Reggie was the same age that Darren had been when he'd scouted him, and his milk was almost over. When he'd come to Darren with his home run race, one final hurrah before he hung it up, Darren had considered it poetic. One final battle before retirement. That's how heroes went out. He hadn't thought the idea would take root, but Reggie was serious. He'd trained hard in the off-season, really pushing himself to the limits. And when the spring season had come around, he'd been ready for the show. This season had seen him smash one ball after another out of the park, and the fans took notice. Attendance was at an all-time high, and people packed the stands for the moment when Reggie blasted one ball after another into the stands. He didn't belt every ball out there, but he hit at least 2 or 3 a game. Those 2 or 3 became 5 or 6, and suddenly Reggie was unstoppable. The deals came in, the sponsorships, the partnerships, but that put an even bigger target on Reggie. He was still fine during drug tests. He had a prescription for the steroids, but he had to cut way back. The steroids weren't the problem, though. The problem was Sylvia. Sylvia was Reggie's wife, his wife of 10 years, and when the affair came out, it nearly broke Reggie. Sylvia was caught on film with someone as they dined together at Laris. She was photographed having drinks with him at Clarence's. She was photographed taking him back to the house she and Reggie shared while he was away with the team. The scandal was immediate, and it was messy. Reggie was distraught. He loved Sylvia, but it appeared she didn't love him the same way. She had wanted to go to therapy and try again, but Reggie couldn't do it. He felt that doing so would make him look weak, a cuckold, and he couldn't have that. He threw her out, and this had begun the slow decline of Reggie's home run dreams. The divorce proceedings had been even worse. Sylvia decided that if there could be no reconciliation, then she would scorch the earth. She got on the stand and talked about his performance issues. She told the tabloids he used enhancers and how they had lessened him. She talked about how the baseball field was the only place he could perform these days, and Reggie became a laughingstock. Suddenly all the goodwill for a man who had been wronged was gone. Suddenly, people chanted for Reggie the Cuck in the stands, and the sign campaign was even worse. Darren hated people sometimes. They couldn't see how this guy, how his friend, was hurting. All they cared about was the scandal and the slander and how it brought them joy. People loved seeing a hero brought low, and Reggie was an easy target. The endorsements were gone, the deals dried up, and now Darren didn't understand why Reggie couldn't just hang it up. "Come on, Reggie," he said, trying one more time. "It's time to face facts. It's over, man. You need to let this blow over. Try again next year. Start." But he stopped talking when Reggie slammed his hand hard enough into the locker to make him think he'd broken it. "Don't you get it, Darren? If I quit, she wins. I can't let that But he bit his lip to stop the word from coming. Even at his lowest, he still couldn't bring himself to speak of her like that. "She ruined me, Darren. She wrecked more than my career. After this season, I'll be untouchable for years. And this is my only shot. Achilles," he said with a laugh as he looked at Darren. "You gave me a fitting nickname, huh? Sylvia knew right where to work the knife, right where my weak spot was. But now, I have to secure my legacy. It's for me, not for you, not for her, for me. I have to show them that if they want to hang horns on me, then they'll have to see those horns every time they open a book or look at a record." Darren came over and tried not to notice how Reggie flinched when he put a hand on his shoulder. "Kid, and I say this with all due respect, you're losing it. You need to think about what's best for you, not this home run record. You're a great player, one of the best, but I can't watch you kill yourself over it." Reggie looked at him, shocked. "What? Because of that shit in the shower? That's just nerves, Darren. I'm okay." It had been a little more than nerves, and Darren knew it. Reggie had been getting really rattled lately. He kept turning suddenly, saying people were laughing at him. Darren hadn't heard anyone laughing. Not openly, or where they might get their teeth pushed in, but Reggie was getting very agitated about what he called people laughing at his back. Darren tried to reassure him that this was something that would blow over, but then the incident on Thursday occurred. After practice, while showering, someone started to call for help, and a bunch of them ran to see what was going on. It was Reggie, and he had one of his teammates by the throat. They were both completely naked, the water making a steamy fog around them, and he had his fist drawn back like he was planning to fight. "You think it's funny, huh? You think something's funny here? My package is none of your business, so stop snickering at me. I don't care what you heard. That bitch is a liar, so stop your fucking snickering." He was just standing there, shouting at his teammate as the water cascaded around him. The other man, Alvarez, said he no longer felt safe around Reggie, and had even talked to some of the other players about having him removed from the team. Darren and Will Anderson, the coach, thought it might be best if Reggie took some time off, got his head right. Reggie had argued that there were only a few games left, and he was 3 home runs away from the record. He needed this, more than he needed anything. "It's not just the shower thing," Darren said, lifting up from the wall he'd been leaning against. "It's the hallucinations. You told me you've been seeing things, shadows and monsters, and I think all this stress is having a negative effect on your mental health. You need to rest, kid. Go take a vacation. You can catch the last game and belt out those 3 last homers. You owe it to yourself to be at your best." Reggie stood up, and as he stood there in his uniform, Darren thought for just a moment that he looked like the same kid he'd seen hitting anything with stripes on it at the college games all those years ago. "I can't pass this up, Darren. I need this. I have to be on top, even if it's just for a little while. I break this record and all the laughing, the jeering, it stops. I just know it." Darren wasn't so sure, but it was hard to argue with the kid when he looked like that. "All right, Achilles. Go out there and make history. Just make sure you don't pull a Casey Jones out there." Achilles, because there was always a difference between the player and the man, looked back at him questioningly. "What's that mean?" "Not a big scholar of written work, I see." Casey stepped up to bat, full of confidence and swagger, but struck out in the end and ruined his reputation. "Don't go out like that, kid. Nobody's going to put Casey on a Wheaties box." Achilles nodded and headed out to the field. Darren couldn't have known how right he had been, but Reggie had some ideas. Reggie hadn't just been hearing snickers and jeers. He'd been seeing things he couldn't explain, things he didn't dare tell Darren about. Coach would take him off the team if he knew he was seeing stuff that wasn't there, and Darren would be right behind him. It wasn't like he was seeing giant rabbits or fire-breathing dragons or anything. What Reggie was seeing were shadows that shouldn't be there. They weren't like the usual shadows that people cast. They weren't even like the shadows he would find scary when he was a kid and he saw a chair with clothes hanging off of it. No, what Reggie was seeing were these strange shadow people that seemed to live at the edges of his vision. He would wake up sometimes, whether it was in a hotel room or in the small home that he had once shared with his wife, and he would see them standing there before he blinked and they would vanish. Sometimes he'd be driving, putting on his gear in the locker room or even in the shower, cleaning up after practice, and there they would be, just staring at him with their teeth out, and their cynical little laughs would be on full display. He came to the back of the line and saw Alvarez move up a few spaces so that he didn't have to be near him. Reggie felt bad about that. He had really thought that Alvarez was laughing at him. He realized now that it was the shadows, those hateful things that were trying to ruin his life. But he didn't honestly think they were real. He had started to think they might be stress, maybe even his mind's way of coping with the challenges his life was undergoing. He was almost 40, in a game for 20-year-olds. He knew he was the odd man out. He knew he only had a few years left to make his name. But when he hit that home run that would put him in the record books, he knew that no one would remember what his wife had said on the stand. Once he hit that home run, all they would know was that he was the best. The announcer brought the team out, the national anthem was sung, and the first pitch was thrown out. After that, the game got rolling pretty much as usual. Coach had let Reggie know that he'd be batting far down in the lineup, and he sounded apologetic about it, but firm. "The scandal's good for business, but it's not good for baseball. I don't want to encourage him, you understand." Reggie did, but it still sucked. As he sat on the bench, the laughing still hadn't stopped. Some of it was the fans. He had seen the signs and heard the chants, but some of it was something else. That laughing was different. That laughing sounded like mice walking in a crypt, like leaves in an abandoned hallway, like the laughter that bubbles up from hell. Reggie didn't get to bat in the first or the second inning. The team was doing well, but their opponents were really on fire tonight. When he took the field, Reggie ignored the Peanuts gallery and tried his best to cover his spot. Still, when a group of fans started catcalling him after he missed a particularly easy grounder, it was hard not to simply storm off the field. He'd been the victim in all of this. His ex-wife had cheated on him, after all. Why were people laughing at him over something that he had been hurt by? In the third inning, he finally got his chance to bat. The announcer called him out. He stepped up into the box with all the swagger he usually possessed. But as he prepared to swing, he saw something in the first row across the field. It could have just been someone sitting in a shadow. It could have been someone wearing a hoodie, but the three of them, seated in the field across from him, were grinning horrors. As one of them waved at him, he heard the umpire call "strike" and realized he'd missed the pitch. The fans went wild, cheering and yelling at him to keep his eyes on the game. Reggie tightened his grip on the bat, but as the second one came across the plate too, he swung and missed. He could feel sweat flowing off of him now. He had to hit another homer. He had to get the crowd back on his side. And as the ball came in, Reggie swung and hit it into the outfield. Luckily, the outfielder was a little slower than he should have been, and the ball tipped against the outfield wall and fell into the stands. He had the home run, but it was far from the solid hit he had wanted. He needed to finish this streak, and he needed to finish it now. He got to bat twice in the fifth inning, the whole lineup running a little longer than usual. His first bat hit a whopper, sending it soaring into the stands as the announcer called a home run, and Reggie rounded the bases like a hero. You would have thought he was a clown, though, the way the crowd taunted him. He could hear cries of "Cuckold" and "Little Peter" as he rounded the bases, and it took some of the swagger out of his run. These people were nuts. Why were they doing this to him? He had never given them any reason to hate him. Reggie was walking by the time he had come back to the bullpen, and though some of his teammates murmured congratulations, the mood was muted. He sat on the bench, trying to shake the images he had seen. While rounding the bases, listening to the laughing, jeering, terrible audience, Reggie had seen some of them standing amongst them. They were hanging off them, their teeth much too close to their vitals. Were they responsible for this? He didn't know how they could be, but the laughter was beginning to become worse as the night began to fall. The other players were beginning to notice too. It was messing with them, both teams, and even the announcer was starting to take notice. "Something seems to be going on in the stands. Whatever it is, I'm supposed to remind everyone not to distract the players. It's..." He started to chuckle a little. "It's distracting to make them them." But he was really losing it now. The stands were cackling, and Reggie pulled his knees to his chest. This was too much. The mean laughter was one thing, but this was like dead people laughing. It was so creepy. It was too much. He started to lose it. He felt himself beginning to chuckle. He couldn't help it. It was all so goddamn funny. "Achilles," someone said, and he looked up to see the coach laughing and staggering towards him. Go on, hero. It's your turn up to bat." Reggie stood up, chuckling as he took the plate. He aimed the bat at the crowd, but as he looked, the stands were full of those dark, grinning horrors. They were in every seat, sitting everywhere, and As he took the plate, they stood and seemed to do a better wave than anyone he'd ever seen. The ball came pelting at him, and as he swung, it flew out into the stands and was lost in the throng of dark characters. Then they boiled over the wall onto the field, covering him as he whispered 3 words before he was lost forever. Home Run King. This was getting out of control. Director Hires put his hands in his pockets as he looked over the bodies that littered the stadium. The numbers were in the tens of thousands. They had all come to see Achilles, and whether it was to see him fail or see him win, it was irrelevant. They'd all choked to death, and the party line was some sort of gas leak. Several newscasters were speculating that it might be terrorist-related, but the FBI was quietly slapping down those kinds of ideas. The last thing they needed was a mass panic like that. "Where the hell is Warwick?" Hires groused. "The biggest incident in years, and he's nowhere to be seen." His last report was about chasing a lead on the source of the incident. Hires shook his head. "Well, he better be finding something good, or we're going to be in a world of shit." My grandpa was kind of a weird guy. I only knew him until I was 6, but I could just tell, even at that age, that there was something a little off about him. He lived in the family home, a semi-mansion that sat on about 30 acres of property up in East Tennessee. He would hunt out there, or so Mom said, and sometimes he would order exotic game and have it released on the property. Mom said that I had to be careful out there when I went to play in the yard on our frequent visits to Grandpa's house, because the rumors were that he didn't always catch the animals he released. The trophy room was certainly impressive, and he had heads from all sorts of things mounted on the walls. He had a stuffed grizzly bear that was bigger than I was, several exotic cats that were put in various poses, and even a bald eagle that he would hide under a curtain if anyone important came to visit. He would always wink at me and say that it was our little secret. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. My grandpa wasn't weird around kids or anything. He kind of looked like the Monopoly guy, with a white beard and a white mustache that didn't match his bald head at all. He wore these clothes that were somewhere between a robe and a suit, and he always wore slippers, even when he was outside. He had a special pair for when he went hunting, and the gun he used was easily bigger than he was. He said it was an elephant gun, and he said that one day he'd love to hunt one of those magnificent creatures. Anyway, that's not really what you're here to hear about. Grandpa died a month before my 7th birthday. Mom said it was a stroke, and we all had to go to his house for a funeral. It wasn't a big funeral. Grandpa had lots of friends, but they weren't allowed to attend. Mom said Grandpa knew movie stars and presidents, even dictators from other countries, and she would show me pictures of them on the wall in his gallery when we came to visit. I'd gotten excited at first, thinking I'd get to meet some of them, but Mom said it was just for family, so it would be us, my cousins, and my aunts and uncles. Mom had 2 sisters and a brother, and I had about 10 cousins between the 3 of them. They were all older than me. I was the baby of the family, but they never really mistreated me or anything. We all played together, the ones of us that were still young enough to play, and I remember being excited all over again when I realized that I'd get to see them. I hadn't seen my uncle's kids in probably 3 years, and my cousin Jamie and I both collected Pokemon cards, which I wanted to trade. Mom let me bring them, but said I'd have to leave them in the car until after the funeral. "I know you want to play with your cousins, kiddo, but this really isn't that sort of event." I didn't know any better. I'd never been to a funeral before. I can tell you now, I've never been to a funeral like that one since. We arrived at about 8 in the morning, and we were the first to arrive. Mom had agreed to show up early so that she could help with the flower arranging and get the chairs set up. Of her siblings, Mom had always been the one that spent the most time with Grandpa. Mom was the one who gave the hospital his information whenever he had to go in. Mom was the one who signed the papers when he had to rework the will or get medical care. And Mom was the one that the coroner had called when they found Grandpa dead. I don't think Mom was responsible for his estate or anything, but she was definitely the one who got called more than anyone else. Mom was a writer, so she was usually at home working on some novel. I never thought we were rich, but I knew that Mom didn't have to go to work like everyone else's mom did. I went to public school, I ate school lunch, and I got my clothes from the mall, just like all the other kids I knew. I knew my cousins had fancy clothes and fancy toys, but Mom made it pretty clear that I got what I earned. There had always been rumors that Grandpa had gotten Mom's first book published, but I never believed them. Mom's writing was amazing, and the others were probably just jealous. So, we came in to see Grandpa off, and then we'd return to our home and see what came after. As I said, the funeral wasn't a huge event. There were around 16 of us in all, and we were all dressed in our best suits and dresses, all of us looking at the casket that had been set up in Grandpa's dining room. I think all of us sensed how odd it was to have a funeral in the home where we'd celebrated Christmases and New Year's and some of the most important events of our lives. Looking at that casket, I didn't think I'd ever be able to celebrate another Christmas here, not even if Mom dragged me here kicking and screaming. It started normal enough. There were some testimonials, people saying how generous Grandpa had been and how much they would miss him, people talking about memories from times gone by, and a few of them even made toasts with the brandy that had always sat next to Grandpa's chair. My uncle was pretty tipsy when it was all said and done, and as it went on and on, I think all of us were waiting for the casket to be wheeled out so we could go have a bite to eat and head back to our homes. But the reprieve never seemed to come. We just went on talking until we were out of memories to share, and then we all sat there quietly. It was weird, looking at that lacquered coffin, but I wish I'd been allowed to go right on staring at it. The last person on the stage was Grandpa's attorney, Mr. Madreau. I had seen Mr. Madreau before. We all had, from time to time, and today he was dressed in what had to be his best suit, his wispy hair slicked back on his skull, which made him look like half a corpse himself. He cleared his throat, and we all looked up at the coffin as he unrolled a piece of paper and read aloud, "This is the last will and testament of Mr. Earl St. Clair. Mr. St. Clair has said that the matter of his inheritance has never been settled, but today he wishes to settle it for one and all. Mr. St. Clair has asked me to inform you that whoever looks away last is the heir to everything." I remember everyone in the crowd looking extremely surprised. My uncle sat forward like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. He was the oldest. He had assumed that everything would go to him, but it appeared now that there was going to be something a little different. There was a lot of low mumbling throughout those assembled, and when Mr. Madreau didn't elaborate, my uncle decided to ask. "I don't understand," he said, as he took another sip of brandy. "Look away from what?" As if on cue, we all heard a grinding coming from the area in front of the casket. The casket began to turn, and as it did, we could see Grandpa as he lay down amidst the velvet swags inside. He was still dead, his arms still crossed over his chest, but the machinery wasn't done quite yet. It tilted the old man, brought him to an upright position, so that we couldn't help but look at him. And then it became clear. Everything was on display, From his wrinkly spotted jowls to his thinning hairline to his puffy eye bags. He was my grandpa, but there was something horrific about seeing him like this. Even at 6, I couldn't properly put it to words, and I still can't. One of my cousins, Jamie, in fact, cried out and turned away, and Mr. Madreau shook his head and made a mark across the list. It appeared that this was the game, and suddenly everyone seemed to know the stakes. You wouldn't have said it was so hard, staring at a man that you loved and admired, but there was something extremely off-putting about looking at my grandfather's corpse. He had never looked that way in life, and it was like looking at a wax dummy or a particularly good piece of grotesque art. Mom had patted my arm and said that if I wanted to look away, I could, but I found that I didn't. It was my grandpa, and even though it was a little scary to look at him like this, I knew that I had to do him this favor. I had to be the last one to look away, not because I wanted his money, but because I didn't want him to look down from wherever he was and think that I'd given up because I didn't love him. I know how silly that sounds, but when you're a kid, these things make perfect sense. As I sat there and stared at my grandpa, I could hear other people turning away. Some of them were crying, others were being sick, and I didn't understand why. Sure, the dead body was scary, but it was just Grandpa. Grandpa had never hurt anybody. Grandpa had helped a lot of us, in fact. I couldn't think of a time when my grandfather had ever... All thoughts slipped out of my head as his eyes slipped open, and I watched his mouth pull up into a grin. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought he was going to speak, but he didn't. He just sat there, looking like he had the punchline to a joke that he would never tell. And soon, it was just me and my mother. I had to stop myself from laughing, right up until his left eye winked. That took my breath away. He'd always winked just like that when he'd see me. It was our special exchange. It made me want to cry. I almost looked away when she started to weep. Almost. But I remembered the rules and kept my eyes firmly glued on my grandpa's body. Why was she crying? I didn't understand why any of them were so upset. But all of a sudden she got up and started running for the exit. And Grandpa's attorney said that I was the inheritor of Grandpa's estate. As he began to clap, the coffin descended back towards the ground, and I was left very confused, but happy as well. I wouldn't understand how lucky I had been, not till the car ride home. Grandpa had left me everything. His house, his cars, his money, all the art, everything. It was all held in trust until I was old enough, of course, and Mr. Madreau said that some of the money would likely go to maintaining my grandfather's palatial estate. Mom seemed happy, but her eyes were still wet-looking. It seemed she was on the verge of crying even now, and Mr. Madreau said that he would be in touch with the rest of the paperwork. I remember asking Mom why she was crying on the way home, and she said it had been sad to see Grandpa dead. I asked her why the others had been crying, and she said it must have been the same for them as well. I told her they didn't seem sad. They had seemed happy until Grandpa had wanted to play his last game. She kept peeking at me as I talked, turning her head and taking these little looks. And then she asked me a strange question, a question I wasn't sure how to answer. "Did he say anything to you?" "Who?" I asked, not sure who she meant. "Your grandpa. Did he say anything to you?" I almost laughed, thinking she was joking. "Of course not, Mommy. Grandpa's dead. Dead people don't talk." She didn't say anything after that, but I could see her peeking at me the whole way home. I think Mom expected there to be some fallout after the funeral, but nobody contested the will. My aunt never talked to me again, but not out of jealousy. My uncle was the same way, and they all seemed afraid of me in some way. I was just a kid, so it never really made any sense. Not until Mom died when I was 21. It was very sudden, stomach cancer that ate her up before she could even get treatment for it. And even my money couldn't save her. By then I'd inherited everything. I was living in Grandpa's old house. I offered the doctor any amount of money if he could save her. I'd have mortgaged the house if it meant my mother would live. But they said there was nothing they could do for her. Sometimes, young man, these things just happen, and there isn't anything that can be done. I remember one night, as she sat there holding my hand, she asked me something she hadn't asked me in 15 years. Something I hadn't thought about in almost that long. Please, I have to know. What did your grandpa say to you on the day of his funeral? I looked at her in disbelief, thinking she must be losing it as she lay there. I told you, Mom, he didn't say anything to me. How could he? He was dead. Dead people don't say anything. She let go of my hand, her own seeming to go limp as she stared at the wall of the hospital room. You got off lucky then. Maybe you really did deserve the inheritance. I asked her what she meant, and she looked at me like she had never seen me before. There was something else in there, though. Something like resolve. I'll tell you, but only once, so you better listen closely. I had wondered, the same as you on the night of your grandpa's funeral. People were losing their minds, running off and being sick, and I didn't understand any of it. I just thought maybe they were being silly, probably because Grandpa had always loved me, just like he loved you. I was sitting there, wondering how long this was going to go on. And then his eyes opened, and he frowned at me. I thought maybe the stitch had just come undone from his mouth, and maybe the spirit gum had come off of his eyes, but then his mouth flopped open, and he started to speak. He told me I didn't deserve it, that he knew I'd only taken care of him all these years because I wanted what he had. I'd never shown it, never acted as upfront about it as the others, but he still knew. That's why you brought your boy around, so I would see him. You knew that if you wanted any of what I had, you needed to get in my good graces. I love you, Caroline, but you betrayed me in the end. Not as bad as some of the others, but betrayal is betrayal. That was when I got up and left. I got up and ran because he was right. I loved that old man. I loved him with all my heart, but I was greedy too. I let him talk to people he knew so that it would get more attention than it deserved. I let him help make my career. And then, after all that, I still coveted what he had. I didn't deserve it, but given what your uncle and your aunt told me, I got off light. Ask them if you dare. It makes no difference to me. I won't be here much longer. She died a few hours later. I'm sitting in my grandpa's study now, drinking brandy that is probably worth more than the house my mother left me in her own will. I can't bring myself to ask my relatives what Grandpa might have said to them when his casket popped itself open and we were made to play such a terrible game. I know a little of it. Grandpa left some notes behind before he died. I know some of my cousins were stealing from him. I know my uncle was also embezzling money from one of the companies that Grandpa left him in charge of. I know my aunts had been taking some of the things my grandma had left behind before she died. But there were other things. Worse things. One of my aunts had actually killed someone one night when she was driving drunk, and Grandpa had covered it up. My uncle's oldest son had gotten a girl pregnant and then beaten her nearly to death, something my uncle had asked my grandfather to smooth over. There are so many little secrets like that in his black book, the book my grandpa left in his desk. Still, the next time one of them asks for money, as they so often do, I may offer them a trade. They may have their money, as long as they tell me the secret of what that old corpse said to them before they left the room crying. Masha might have just come from lunch, but her tummy was full of butterflies. She had never been so nervous in her entire life, and it all centered around this midterm. Dex had been done, but he didn't look like his midterm had gone very well. Rebecca and Gerald had talked a little bit about their own experiences, but it had been vague and not particularly helpful. Dunstan hadn't shown up at all, and no one had seen him. The other blue bands talked quietly about what might be in store, but none of them seemed to know for sure what to expect. Brain exercises, to be sure, but it was hard to say with this place. None of them had eaten very much, and when the bell rang, they left for class amidst a flurry of quiet talk. "Can't be that much different from the test we took last year," Daniel said, looking at Jenny, Brittany, and Heather. "I guess so," said Heather. "They hyped the test up last year at school, but it all turned out to be nothing much more than a standardized test." "Yeah," piped up Jenny, looking less dour. "I bet it's nothing to worry about when you get down to it." This seemed to give them hope, but not Masha. Masha had never been tested in earnest. At her school, you didn't have tests until 3rd grade, but it was a little different in the kindergarten. In the kindergarten, it seemed like tests were whenever the adults decided they needed to test. Some of the older kids just thought this was business as usual, but not Masha. She felt like she might be about to shake off her chair as Mrs. Cashmere came in and smiled at all of them. Masha liked Mrs. Cashmere. She was always smiling and telling them to do their best, and it reminded her of her kindergarten teacher back at regular school. What had her name been? Masha tried to remember, but it kept slipping. Miss Honey, Miss Honeywell, Mrs. Hunter. Masha pushed it out again. It didn't matter. What mattered was getting through this midterm alive. "Good morning, class. Now that we've had our lunch, it's time for our midterms." As if on cue, the door opened, and 5 adults walked in. They were the ones who took the children. Masha was sure of it. They filed in like soldiers and lined up behind Mrs. Cashmere. They didn't look at anything in particular, but just stood in perfect silence as she spread her hands. "These are our helpers. You'll be sharing your powers with them. If you're a sender, then you will be sending them a pre-planned image, like a sandy beach or a forest at night. If you're a receiver, then you will be pulling an image from their mind that we have told them to think about. At the end of class, we will assess your abilities based on the progress you've made." Many of the students seemed to ease noticeably, and Mrs. Cashmere laughed at their elated faces. "What did you think midterm was going to entail? This isn't Hogwarts. No one is going to ask you to fight a dragon." That got some chuckles from the students, and as the adults, the snatchers, Masha thought, paired off with the kids, there seemed to be some kind of problem with the one assigned to Masha. The woman blinked, and turned to speak quietly with the teacher. The two had a soft but heated discussion, and finally the woman took a seat. She was dark-skinned, Indian maybe, and her hair was wound into a tight braid that fell down her back. "Hello," she said, smiling warmly. "I'll be your tester today. Are you a sender or a receiver?" Masha suspected she was both, but she'd been designated as a sender, and she told her so. The woman was smiling, but Masha could see the sweat creeping down her neck. She was nervous, but Masha wasn't sure why. Masha was just a little girl. Why would this woman be scared of her? It didn't make sense, but Masha thought that she could find out. "Very well, here," she said, offering her a card. "Take one and beam the image into my head." Her hands shook as she offered them, and Masha took one from the middle and read it to herself. "A beach, just before a thunderstorm." Masha nodded, closing her eyes and beaming the thoughts into the woman's mind. The hardest part of this was not smiling as she sent and received. Masha was sending the woman exactly what she wanted: a seaside with a thunderstorm back in the background. The clouds were rolling in, the waves were crashing on the sand, and she had placed the woman on the shore as she lay on a blanket and watched it all happen. If she wanted to get fancy, Masha could even simulate raindrops on her skin when the rain came in. The sand would grit under her hand. She could hear the seagulls as they wheeled through the rough sky. But all of it was little more than an illusion. As the woman watched the waves and the clouds, Masha rifled through her memories. The woman's name was Anna. She was 28 years old, a college graduate, and she was swimming in debt. Normally, the Air Force would have covered her schooling when she got out, but she'd been dishonorably discharged because one of her commanding officers had laid on top of her a few times and then wouldn't see her again. Masha wasn't sure what that meant, but it was probably one of those things that adults did that just didn't make a lot of sense. When Anna had threatened to tell her higher-ups about the affair, he had acted first. He had told people she was trying to steal money from him. That wasn't exactly it, but it was something like that. Whatever it was, they had thrown her out of the Air Force over it. She'd been discharged and decided to go to college instead. She found it hard to get work, and her degree didn't mean much once she had. That's how she had fallen in with these people. They paid big bucks to grab kids off the sidewalk and out of their houses. She looked nice, kind of like one of the princesses in a Disney cartoon. But she wasn't. She stole kids. She hurt people. She... "Stop," Anna whispered, but Masha ignored her. She kept going. She made sure to bring the rain in to distract the woman from her rifling, but she knew she could feel it. Masha had done it before, but she'd never been this deliberate. She saw that the woman was afraid of her. Many of them were, the snatchers and the minders. They believed that Chandra had been attacked by her in her sleep, and that she had given the other girl a brain aneurysm. She saw that Chandra was dead, but it hadn't been her who'd done it. Masha saw something else, but the woman's mind recoiled with the information, covering it like a mother might her baby. Masha pushed, but nothing she did could get her the information. "Masha!" That was Mrs. Cashmere. "Masha, sweetie, what are you doing?" "Sandy beach, rain, 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 rain." The woman Masha was supposed to be sending to was repeating the words again and again. Masha had seen too much, and now the lady might be broken. she was going to be in trouble, but not as much trouble if she could fix it. Masha went in and tried to fix what she'd done, but it was no use. The woman's head was a mess of wires and circuits. At least, that was how it appeared to Masha. And when she tried to fix it, there was a lot of smoke and sparks. Masha pushed harder, trying to repair the damage, but it was done and over with. The harder she pushed at the woman, the worse it got. And she finally pulled back to herself as Mrs. Cashmere began trying to get her out. "Masha, Masha, come back, honey." Masha opened her eyes and saw that it was worse than she suspected. The woman was rocking back and forth, humming as she did so, and there were twin trickles of blood coming from her ears. Her eyes looked far and away, and Masha suddenly thought that college debt might be the least of her worries. "Beach, beach, peachy beach, beach, rain, rain, go away, come again another day," she sang, as she rocked back and forth like a teeter-totter. Mrs. Cashmere gently took the prompt from Masha's hand, and the girl was surprised to see she was smiling when she looked up at her. "Very good, Masha. It appears you have successfully sent the image. You have passed the midterm. Go ahead and take the day off if you want." But I... And then Masha waved her hands at the woman as if to say, "Look what I did. How can this be passing?" "Oh, it happens. You wouldn't be the first student to accidentally warp someone beyond repair. But for the finals, you will lose points for damaging your vessel. You can go ahead and leave. It's okay." Masha got shakily to her feet, but one look at her friends was enough to show her that she had done more than pass the midterm. Her friends didn't smile or give her thumbs up, and many of them seemed afraid to look at her. Masha didn't think there would be many of them at dinner, and fewer of them would join her table for breakfast. Masha may have passed the midterm, but she had failed something a lot more important. Okay, we need to talk about this year's Halloween event. We were all sitting in the conference room, a room that had been cleared out and set up in the grow house, not far from her office. I was there, because of course I was, and across from me was Randy, who had taken the other seat at this end of the table. I suppose I would always be security, no matter what mantle I was wearing, and the two of us were there to protect and support her, no matter what. Tobias was there, representing the growers, and so was August, who had been voted as the head of the concession committee. At the far end of the table was the Barker, who had been invited by the lady herself. This raised some eyebrows, mostly from the growers and the concession committee, but the lady had been insistent that the Barker would be a large part of what they intended to do this year. With the six of us assembled, the lady had decided to get right to business. "I like some of the things we did last year, but I don't want the community to think we're just a tricky pony," she said, and then looked at me as if for confirmation. "A one-trick pony, my lady." "Right. So, what can we do for Halloween this year?" I had told her several times that it was only August, not even September yet, but she wanted to go ahead and get ideas together. She wanted this to be a major rebirth for the botanical gardens, and I thought it was a pretty good idea. We had put on a large celebration when she returned, and that was fine, but she wanted something large and grand to signal to the people that she was back, and that the grand gestures of before could begin again. The people of Kashmir would say what they wanted to about the lady, but she was generous in many ways, and she loved the town, probably more than they deserved. "Well," Tobias spoke up, "I think the candy forest from the year before was a big success, I've been reading a little about fairy tales in the past year or so, and I think perhaps that we could integrate one of them into this year's celebration. There's a witch in it. Hansel and Gretel, I said without thinking, and Tobias gave me a bit of a sour look at being interrupted. Precisely, thank you. We could build a witch's hut in the middle of our candy forest and scare kids when they come to see. An excellent idea. Keep me posted on other ideas, Tobias. Randy, how is the security looking for our upcoming event? Just fine, Randy said, taking out a notepad. I've actually been able to divert many of our old security detail to the growers and the concession. These new guys we got in the field are better suited for keeping the park safe. Most of them already have security experience. If the green man decides to show up again, I don't like his chances. Pretty sure a couple of them have assault rifles, and I'm almost certain I saw a Kalashnikov the other night. That's going to be a doozy to explain to the sheriff if he comes snooping around again. Do try to tell them that discretion is the better part of valor, the lady said, but she smiled as she said it and nodded at Randy as he sat back down. What can we do for refreshments? The lady asked, as she looked over at August. August had changed quite a bit in the time after he had been elected as head of concession. They had given him a toga to wear as well, and it had a yellow stripe on it that kind of reminded me of a mustard stain. Apparently, the appointment had raised his regard amongst the other Brandylow, and he was enjoying a much freer existence because of it. I think he argued with Randy once a week about why he couldn't start manufacturing alcohol or growing illicit substances. And though their arguments were lusty, Randy still came out ahead most of the time. Well, we've been working on a kind of ale that's been very popular this time of year. Have any of you possibly heard of pumpkin spice? I stifled a chuckle, and thankfully Randy did too, but the lady looked mystified at what he was saying. Pumpkin spice? No, I don't believe I have. It sounds exotic. It took everything I had not to let August see me chuckle into the back of my hand, and I was pretty sure Randy was pinching himself under the table. Yes, well, it's very popular amongst the young people, and I think it will definitely help us get the edge we need this year. I've been putting it into coffees and even a little into the kombucha that we've been making. I was trying to turn it into an ale, he said as he shot Randy a dark look, but my efforts were sordid in that regard. Randy sighed as if this was not the first time he had had this conversation. August, I don't know how many times I've had to tell you this. The production and sale of alcohol is illegal unless we have a special license. As of yet, we have not been approved for that license, so you cannot sell alcohol at the park. August sniffed theatrically. Seems a little much. Is there any news on when we might expect to see this license? The state has a board, and the board has a process. I've told you that, August. For now, the lady broke in, we will sell only what the magistrate has allowed us to sell. We don't need any extra attention from those that could make life difficult for us. As for snacks, I should be able to make the treats we had last year, which we can use for this year's experiments. I'd like to see some variety, however, so be prepared to submit some menus for our next meeting. August nodded and bowed a little before taking his seat again. Lastly, the Barker has approached me about opening a haunted house inside the park. I think it's a good idea, but I understand there are some concerns. Tobias stood up, adjusted his robe, and fixed the Barker with a disdainful look. Concerns, my lady, might be an understatement. I don't think he ought to be allowed to go on doing what he is doing since time was young, especially not in our home. I sighed. This was something that had been building up for a while. Ever since we had come back from our mission to bring the lady back from the Green Man's realm, Tobias had been very outspoken about his hatred of the Barker. He thought he was a spy. He thought he was biding his time so that he could feed information back to the Green Man. He thought he was planning revenge on them for what they had done to the Green Man, and several other conspiracies that he was very vocal about to anyone who would listen. Never mind that the Barker had helped us find the Green Man and helped us bring back the lady. Tobias didn't want to hear any of that. He wanted the Barker gone, and he wanted it done yesterday. I'd never known Tobias to be so irrational about anything, and it was beginning to grate a bit. Tobias, you've been very vocal about your concerns and distrust about the Barker, but he's been nothing but kind and helpful since coming back to stay at the park. If he wants to open his haunted house, then I see no reason why he should not be allowed to. My lady, I understand that he has gained your trust somehow, but I simply cannot let bygones be bygones. This creature was responsible for your abduction, and no amount of help is going to make me look the other way while he operates with impunity inside our home. I think he should be asked to leave, and I've been very open about that fact. He had been a little too open about that fact as it happened. Tobias had been talking to August and Randy in an attempt to get them on his side, with mixed success. All of the growers and most of the concessionaires had a very narrow view of the Barker, and a lot of it had to do with Tobias's constant tirade against him. I was willing to admit that not all his anger was baseless, but the man had been nothing but helpful since coming back, and I couldn't blame him for the sins of the past, as Tobias did. I'm not saying he should be punished forever for something he may have done in haste, but what I am saying is that we need more than a few months to discern where his loyalties actually lie. The lady steepled her fingers and glowered at him. Tobias flinched a little under her unyielding gaze. I have told you again and again, Tobias, that this matter is closed. I trust the Barker. As long as I have a place here, so does he. He will have the same rights as any of you. I will not put him on trial after what he did for me, and I think if Randy trusts him as well as the summer night, then you should too. I thought that might be a bit of a bold claim, but I didn't dispute it. The Barker had worked very hard over the past few months to help cleanse his reputation after the lady's kidnapping. But I still wouldn't have said that I trusted him. I accepted him and was even hoping that he would earn that trust, but trust is something that's earned, and I wasn't quite ready to give it yet. That being said, I liked the guy well enough, and was really hoping that Tobias would come around in the end. I have been patient with you, Tobias, but this ends now. I will hear no more about this, and you would do well to stop poisoning everyone else against him. He's our ally, whether you like it or not, and that's all that needs to be said on the matter. Tobias looked like he wanted to say more, but nodded and bowed as he returned to his seat and folded his arms crossly. The Barker has asked to set up a... The lady looked over at him as if trying to find the words. What is the term? A bar, my lady, though I'm thinking more of a pavilion where juice and other things could be sold. August looked like he was ready to bluster right out of his chair. We already have refreshments. I don't know why we would need... The Barker cut him off. The refreshments here are merely illusions, my good sir. Nothing they experience in the pavilion is real, but it is often how people work out the things that plague their mind. This is the service that I offer to them. I scare them, but I also help them to see the things that are hurting them. It's the service that I've always provided, a sort of apology for the nature of my powers. That seemed to take some of the bluster out of August, but it only deepened the look of mistrust on Tobias's face. It will run in the guise of a haunted house, the barker went on, luring people in so they can work out their problems. A very fitting scene for the Halloween season. The lady nodded, smiling at all as she told us to be about our business. I will expect some solid plans before the next meeting. I think today, however, we are adjourned. There was some chatter as everyone got up to leave, but I still kept my chair, not wanting to leave the lady's side. That had taken some getting used to in the last couple of months, not being around her. I had been the one person to spend most of my time around her since being turned, but it was as if I felt different when I was around her. Being around her was like sitting in a shaft of sunlight, like basking on a warm day, and it was just nice to be in her company. I didn't know if she felt the same. I had never really asked, but I didn't think she minded me spending so much time with her. It was probably something to do with the mantle. We had been given one each by Titania, and like often calls to like, I suppose. But some of it was just an extension of what I had already been doing when I was just a simple Brandylow. She was my lady, 5 parts mother and 5 parts love of my life, and I think most of us felt like it was an honor just to be near her. I do wish Tobias would let this be, she said, leaning against her fingers and looking troubled as the door closed behind them. In some ways, I get where he's coming from. It was hard for me to forgive the barger for his part in your kidnapping, too. But you forgave him, the lady said. You moved on. I just don't understand why he can't. I shrugged. Sometimes people have a hard time forgiving, especially when they're hurt and someone they love has been hurt. The lady sighed and got up. I'm going to the lily pond. Sometimes creating clears my head. Do you have plans this afternoon? I shook my head. Nothing pressing. Why don't you stop by and lend me some of your power? I find that I often create better when you're around. I smiled as she walked away, thinking I just might. It was going to be an interesting season for the botanical garden. Corey watched the cameras that sat on the wall of his little listening station outside of Kashmir. To the nosy or the industrious, the road that led to the black site would look like nothing so much as an abandoned logging road or an overgrown hiking trail. But little did they know what lay beyond it. Corey had been back here for... Corey had to take a long sip of his coffee as he thought about it. It was less than 5 years, he knew that, but it had been longer than a year, too. He'd killed that nosy reporter more than 3 years ago, so it had to be longer than that. 3 years, he finally decided, but there wasn't a lot of conviction in it. It was like that when you lived near Kashmir. Time got very slippery, and it was hard to remember where you had been or how long you'd been there. Corey didn't have a family. Most of the black site guys didn't, and it made it harder to remember things when you lacked touchstones. Corey didn't have a wife, no kids, no parents to ask why he wasn't at Christmas dinner. He had been in Iraq before this, though. Sometimes. That seemed like a lifetime ago. He'd been involved in a nasty bit of business over there, something that made it necessary to disappear from the face of the earth pretty quickly. Corey had been a good soldier, though, done what he was told and never batted an eye at it, and that was how he had ended up at a post like this. His only real connection to the world outside of Kashmir was BJ, his handler. Once a week, BJ would call him for a status report, and Corey was always hungry for the sounds he might hear in the background. Other than that, his only human interaction were with the people of Kashmir. They had all generally accepted him as just another walk-in, but he tried to keep his interactions with them light. Thank you to the girl at the coffee shop, a nice day to the guy at the grocery store, a nice weather, ain't it, to the old-timers at the general store, and then it was back to business as usual. He liked that. It made it feel like a community and less like a job. The cameras, however, were new. They had arrived a few months ago, 2 large crates of cameras with housings, and a note telling him where they wanted them and where they didn't. "There's a jumpsuit in the box," BJ had told him the night after the box arrived. "Take one of those white vans on the work orders in the envelope and be sure you get them all put up over town." "And what if someone sees through me?" Corey had asked, but BJ had just laughed. "Kid, these people ignore weird stuff all the time. No one is going to look twice at you." On that score, BJ had been right. With the work order in hand and a very convincing-looking setup, Corey had no problem putting the cameras up all over town. There was one in the general store, one at the grocery store, one in the coffee shop, even one at the Kashmir Intrigue. He had set up about 30 cameras all told, and they all seemed to work through this odd sort of wireless network that had been set up remotely. There were several locations he was specifically told not to set up in, and Corey wondered why the files were so intent on leaving out those areas. "Do not, under any circumstances," the order had said, "go near the prison or the forgetfulness clinic. You may set up a camera in the parking lot of the botanical gardens, but you should not attempt to set up one inside under any circumstances. The hospital will also be off limits for medical reasons, and if you see the old man and his grandson, leave immediately." That seemed to be the other part of his observation job: avoidance. He had files on several of the townspeople and strict orders that they were not to see him. People like Dr. Winters, the warden of Stragview, Jack Register and his grandson, Marcus Carmichael. The mysterious owner of the botanical gardens was another one, and the hospital was also off limits for some reason. BJ claimed it was for HIPAA reasons, but Corey wasn't so sure. The people in this town seemed way off. Not like mental patients, but like they might be from a different time. He had seen a few of them with cell phones, but it was rare that you saw one of them that looked like a zombie. They had computers, but they never seemed to use them for mindless stuff. It was like an updated Mayberry somehow, and Corey didn't understand it. Instead of DoorDash or Grubhub, they had bike meals, and they called them on the phone tree to make their orders. They had live music in the park. They had monthly celebrations for community outreach as much as for actual holidays. The town was stuck in this strange time loop, it seemed, and the longer he stayed here, the more things he seemed to forget. It had started with little things. Corey would leave his cell phone on the desk and just forget it was there. He would forget to check his social media, something he'd been fond of since he was a kid. He would forget what day it was. He would forget about the house he had waiting for him back in Arkansas when his deployment was over. He would just think about the town and what it would be like to stay there when it was all said and done. He could get a spot at one of those shops downtown, maybe sell hunting gear or meat or something. Kashmir needed a butcher. The one they had was far from professional, and Corey had some experience with meat and blood. He knew just where he'd put it, too. There was a little shop on Main Street, the one that had held the deli until the owner got lost in the woods. Lost in the woods, Corey scoffed. Yeah, right. One of those things that had come barreling into his perimeter fence had got him. He was sure of that. They had shown a pretty strong interest in his little setup until he'd pumped a few rounds of full-jacketed ammo out of his AR. He'd been on top of the bunker, too. No sense getting on eye level with those creatures, if he could help it. They didn't seem to have an eye level, not that he could see, but the way they moved reminded him of hunting cats. They were sleek, quick, deadly, and he'd chased at least one of them away every week since he got here. He looked up from his daydream and saw someone coming out of Libris Talent, a shop that had cropped up in Old Town. It was the same pretty boy and his aged corpse of a boss, Mr. Richard T. He'd gotten an emergency folder on that one. Richard T. Seraph was in the same level of spooky as Dr. Winters or the Warden of Stragview, no name included. As they walked up the street, Richard T. looked right at the camera as it hung from the pole and seemed to give it a little wink. Corey sat back a little, not really liking the attention of that fella in the least bit. His mother had an old illustrated copy of the Phantom of the Opera when he was a kid, and the guy walking up the street looked like the old ghost when he'd taken his mask off to show Christine. His mother, he thought, that was someone he hadn't thought of in a while. He tried to remember her, but her face slipped away just as easily as it had slipped in. It didn't matter, he guessed. She was just another ghost in a town of ghosts. He wondered where all the video feeds were getting fed to. Back to BJ, he assumed, but where was he sending them? The Pentagon, the FBI, the Illuminati? Who the hell knew? As long as his checks kept clearing, Corey didn't much care. He watched Richard T. and his assistant head down to the diner, where they bumped into Pamela Winters and Julia. Dr. Winters gave him a look that could curdle cheese, but he just held the door open for her and let them in first. At the general store, Wayne Stokes was buying coffee and eggs. Wayne had replaced the fella Corey had shot outside the doctor's office, and this one seemed to know how to keep his nose out of business. He hadn't been scrutinized too strongly since the reporter's death, and that was just the way he liked it. Corey sighed. It was a slow camera day. He grabbed his coat and decided to head to the coffee shop so he could do a little people watching. People watching was his favorite pastime these days. Large chai latte for Caleb. Corey raised his hand and went to grab the drink. Then he took it to the table near the back wall so he could watch her when she came in. She hadn't been doing well lately, but she still came in every day at 4:30 to get her usual. She wanted a cookies and cream espresso with cold foam, 2 pumps of vanilla, and extra ice. That hadn't been in the dossier, but what had been in there was that this one was dangerous. He didn't have long to wait. She came in about 5 minutes later, her mousy brown hair pulled into a bun and her glasses pushed up on her nose like a librarian. It was hard to believe that this one was on the agency's most wanted list, but he'd seen stranger. They also wanted her alive, so that was going to be a little difficult. Dead was usually easier. "Hey, Candace, back for your afternoon treat?" the barista asked, as she pulled the beverage from beneath the counter. Corey had seen her make it not 5 minutes ago and stick it beneath the front counter. You couldn't have done that with very many customers, but Candace was just about as regular as a train. "Thanks, Ruby. I need this little pick-me-up in the afternoon. Could I also get an iced latte with cold foam? I'm meeting a friend for coffee." The barista gushed, but all Corey heard was "friend." Well, shit. That was going to make things interesting. He picked up his drink and decided that today wasn't going to be the day. Maybe next time, but not today. He'd catch her on her own and make his move. But for now, it was all about observation and intel. Mr. Seraph looked at the man like he might be insane. This was what he got for moving to this backwater. When you dealt with city people, you got writing talent, debate skills, or culinary expertise. When you came out to the sticks, because you were afraid of supernatural entities that could hurt the people you liked, then you got, well, this. Instead of sitting in his office, Mr. Seraph was now getting pig crap on his boots as he looked at what was likely a fine specimen of porcine persuasion, but just looked to him like a muddy pig. And you say that, He looked at Mr. Manderley, the oaf in the overalls, who was standing barefoot in the stall like his toes weren't squelching and God only knew what. "Wilbur," he said proudly. "Right. You say that Wilbur has a talent for dancing." "Yes, sir," the man said. "You ever been to a state fair?" "Sadly, no," Mr. Seraph said, with a smile that didn't seem quite genuine. When the call came in that morning, Lucifer had offered to go in person. He had spoken to the man for nearly 30 minutes before agreeing to a home visit, and he'd seemed gleeful when he hung up the phone. He had grimaced when he checked his watch, though, saying that he'd made lunch plans with Juliet, and he didn't want to break them. When Mr. Seraph had offered to go instead, Lucifer had smiled and shaken his head. "These are down-home people, boss. I grew up with these kinds of people, and I know what they expect. They want to have a little coffee on the porch, talk about the weather, talk about how the high school team is doing this year, talk about the storm of '97 or some such thing, and then they want to get down to business. You're a little too brusque for these sort of folks. They'll peg you as a city slicker from the jump." Mr. Seraph wanted to be offended, but the boy's analysis was correct in many ways. Lucifer Marvelous Jones had been accused of many things, but poor judgment was rarely one of them. "You don't think I was always some grinning specter in a suit, do you?" he asked, reaching for his hat. "Why, I once walked the earth like a pestilence, trading for livestock and precious metals as often as I did for talent. Why, I could charm the most skinflint musicians and the hardest-nosed orators in any village, and usually leave them weeping once I'd left town." "Yeah," said Lucifer, "but this is the South. They've been writing songs about deals with the devil since they could hold a fiddle. They'll see you coming a mile away." Mr. Seraph had laughed and shook his head. "Tell Miss Juliet I said hello, and enjoy your lunch. Make sure you meet her at the diner, however. My sister will probably eat you alive if she sees you lurking around her office." Lucifer smiled and thanked him, but now that he was standing out here in the pig pen, looking at a large, muddy creature that seemed to be more talented at fly flicking than dancing, he wished he had let the young man go about it. It had been... how long? How long had it been since he'd stood in a pig pen? 100 years? 200? Time was funny, but it seemed more honest than his usual work. Mr. Seraph, Serre Olagrandor, in those days, had been a trader of livestock and other sundries as he looked for real talent. The local children had called him Sari Clanker because of all the bottles. He had stored the talent in bottles back then, because it was easier to transport than books. In those days, people weren't as fond of books as they were potions and miracles, and Mr. Seraph had reinvented himself many times over the years. "Well," the man said, hooking his thumbs into his overalls, "in his day, Wilbur was the best dancing pig in 5 states. He went town to town with the fair, entertaining people and making them smile. 'Wilbur!' he yelled, and the pig flicked his ears and seemed to look up. 'Show the man how you do.' That really isn't..." But then he turned his head and noticed that the man had picked up a fiddle from the nearby stump. Did he just leave it here? Mr. Seraph wondered. When he struck up a tune, the pig jumped up like he was on fire. He started shuffling around, left foot up, right foot up, shimmying and dancing like a disco queen in a mud puddle. Mr. Seraph had to give it to the little oinker. He was really going for it. He could see little ripples in the mud that Wilbur had been sleeping in, and it was likely the most energetic the pig had ever been. The problem, however, became apparent pretty quickly. Wilbur was a fine dancer, but every time he came down on his back left leg, the pig grunted and jumped visibly. Mr. Seraph looked at the leg critically and could see a slight twist to the extremity. It was probably a break, but Mr. Seraph thought it might be just how the pig's back leg was growing, due to lifestyle, diet, or 100 other things. When it finished its dance, Mr. Seraph nodded, clapping a few times as he turned back to Mr. Manderly. Very impressive, but I don't know how much longer he's going to be able to do that. Looks like that back leg is paining him some. The smile slipped off the farmer's face, but he hid it well as he put down the fiddle. He come down wrong on it last year when he was stepping off a cattle car. Doctors say it likely won't heal right, and eventually it'll make it so he can't walk no more. Doctor says if he'd stop dancing, then he might be able to walk on it for the rest of his life, but Wilbur loves to dance, and I can't force him to stop on his own. That's why I called you, Mr. Seraph. Mr. Manderly led him back to the porch and offered him a rocker and a glass of sweet tea. Mr. Seraph accepted the chair, but declined the tea. It had been sitting out like it was waiting for them, and he could see several flies doing the backstroke in it. Mr. Manderly didn't see them, or he didn't care. Mr. Seraph tried not to wince as he drained half the glass and most of the flies, belching loudly before going on. I hear people tell that you can take talent away. They say that when you take it, it's gone, and they never go back to it. That's what I want for Wilbur. I tried just not playing, but Wilbur, he gets so sad without his dancing. Yeah, I can tell he does. Sometimes I come to see him and he looks up at me like he's saying, "Come on, Charlie, saw that fiddle just one more time for me." I don't want him to suffer, but I don't want him to do himself mischief neither. Can you help me, Mr. Seraph? Mr. Seraph took a deep breath and plastered his best smile back into place. I believe so. I don't know what I'd be able to offer you in compensation until it's done, but Mr. Manderly cut him off with a wave of his meaty hand. I don't want no money. If it makes Wilbur not hurt himself, then it's worth it to me. Mr. Seraph nodded and rose from his rocker. Then, there's one thing I need from you. Name it, said Mr. Manderly, before rising ponderously from his own chair. I need you to loan me your fiddle, just for a little while, he said, and he saw the look of piggish greed on the man's face. I need it to draw out the talent. No one but me has played that fiddle since my daddy died, he half growled, reaching down to finish off the glass of tea in one swig. You promise not to break it? I will be very gentle, Mr. Seraph promised, stepping back towards the hog pen. My father insisted that all his children play an instrument. My sister plays the cello, though I've never heard it. My older brother plays the lyre, though sometimes it seems to play him. Mr. Seraph bent down and picked up the fiddle, marveling at its craftsmanship as he drew the bow across it. It was marvelous, something that had likely been passed down through the generations, and he understood the man's trepidation about giving it to him. This was a work of art, and he couldn't imagine anyone just leaving it out here on a stump. If there was anything here with power, it was probably the fiddle, and he had a definite itch to play it. Me personally, I like the classics. I liked all the stories of my uncle and his fiddle, so I decided to take it up too. It served me well over the years. Mr. Seraph took a bottle from his pocket, a simple thing with a rubber stopper. and set it on the fence post of the hog pen. Wilbur looked up when he saw the fiddle and seemed to wag his little tail. Even injured, it was clear that Mr. Manderly had the right of it. Wilbur loved to dance, and if they didn't get the talent out of him, he'd dance himself into a slaughterhouse or a string of sausages. Wilbur shivered when Mr. Seraph struck a long note on the fiddle. He began with something familiar, something by Chopin or Mozart maybe, and then began to speed up as he grew bolder. He was playing something fast and deep, the notes sawing through the trees like angry bees. Wilbur was dancing and jigging like his life depended on it. His little hooves were really working, and as Richard T. Seraph looked down, he was surprised to see that his little glass bottle had become a mason jar, and the jar was half full. Bum leg or not, Wilbur was moving like something his size had no business moving. He would have probably started dipping and kicking like a Cossack having a panic attack if his little legs would allow it. To Mr. Seraph's continued surprise, Mr. Manderly was also dancing. He was less coordinated, but no less enthusiastic than Wilbur. The man was sweating and wheezing as he did so, do-si-doing and promenading left and right with invisible partners, slapping his knee and bucking and winging. It was probably the most activity the man had shown in years, and the jar just kept filling. The mason jar became a tall boy, then a large thing for storing preserves or jam, then a jug like a moonshiner might drink from. Mr. Seraph wanted to stop playing, but he was quite unable. The music had a hold of him, too, and as the pig and its master danced and danced, Mr. Seraph sawed the fiddle and played and played. It had been lunchtime when he arrived, but as he played, the day just went on and on. The pig and the man were shaking and gasping. The old demon was sure that smoke would begin to rise from the instrument, and as the talent finally finished, he was left with a jug that looked gallons deep. It was a clay monstrosity that stood nearly a foot tall, but as Mr. Seraph picked it up, he could feel the weight as it shrank to something he could put into his pocket. Mr. Manderly lay in the mud of his dooryard. Wilbur was snoozing in the mud of his pen. But the old farmer snorted when Mr. Seraph stuffed the check into the front of his overalls. "No, sir," he wheezed. "I said I didn't need—" "Mr. Manderly, your pig gave me more talent than a troupe of backup dancers. You can cash that check, burn it, or blow your nose with it. But talent like that requires payment. I've doubled it also, because I wish to purchase your fiddle. It's a marvel, and I don't think you'll need it anymore." He expected the old farmer to argue, but instead, he just nodded. Unbeknownst to him, Mr. Manderly had given him his fiddle-playing talent as well. It hadn't been much, a squiddle of raw talent, but it would mean his fiddling days were done. Mr. Seraph looked at the instrument tucked under his arm. He liked the way it felt. He liked the way it sounded, and it would be wasted here with no one to play it. "Have a good evening, Mr. Manderly," he said, taking his leave as the pig and the owner slipped back into unconsciousness. So much talent from a farm animal, Mr. Seraph reflected. Kashmir was full of surprises. It was my off day, but it appeared I would never truly be free of this place. I was here by choice today, though. I'd come to see Frankie, since she had the night shift when I didn't. For those who don't work night shifts, it's hard to just fall back into a regular sleep schedule once your body is used to staying up all night. I found myself here some nights, walking the halls or visiting with Frankie. We'd become pretty good friends, and she liked to tell stories about how the hospital used to be. It was kind of fun hearing about how some of the older nurses used to be giggly girls, or how she'd seen some of the doctors when they were kids coming in with their parents. I helped her navigate some of the newer things that she might have missed for my part. Cell phones were still kind of a mystery to her, and she wasn't sure what to make of the things that I had taken to be normal. The computer had been a major hurdle for her, but she was picking it up pretty well. So, I gotta ask a weird question, and it's gonna come off as very weird. My cheeks got a little red. Sure, what you got? I'd expected that she might invite me to dinner or something, but she turned to the computer and pointed at a spreadsheet of the 3rd floor. There's a guy in room 320, Mr. Smith, and I'm trying to find out how long he's been here. I got down next to her, scrolling through a few things before bringing up the patient file. It's in the charting part. It gives a start date and usually a forecasted release date. Most of the time it's 4 nines until the doctor... But I stopped talking when I realized the guy had no start date or end date. That's weird, I murmured, scrolling through a few other things as I looked for a reason for all of this. There's no diagnosis either. He's on the 3rd floor, that tracks, but he doesn't seem to have a primary physician either. That's really weird. I scrolled a little more, looked a little deeper, but there was nothing. It was like Mr. Smith was just here, just taking up space. This was a hospital, and every bed was important, as I had learned from room 301, and the idea of someone just taking up space was a strange one. Come to think of it, I whispered to myself, I think this guy has been here for a while. Normally, the name Smith would have just been easy to overlook, but it was so mundane in this case that it kind of stood out. I had been here for about 3 years, and it seemed like I'd seen his name on the list for a while, though I couldn't swear to it. What made you look into this guy? I asked on a whim. Well, and again, this is going to sound weird, but I think I remember him. I almost laughed. You remember a John Smith? That would be impressive. Well, I remember him because I think he was here when I worked here. I looked at her oddly. This fellow's been here for 50 years? She shrugged. Maybe longer than that. I sat back. Any idea why? Frankie settled her skirts as she sat back as well. I think, despite the time, it would always be the 70s for her. She was always slipping back into the speech pattern of her day, slipping in little fashion choices that were familiar to her, and it was clear that she would never truly leave her time period. She was a stranger here, but she was trying to make the best of it. Well, I heard a story from one of my contemporaries when I started here. She said that one night they found a guy outside the ER, a guy who was barely clinging to life. They didn't know where he'd come from or how he'd gotten there, but they took him into the emergency room and tried to find out what was wrong with him. She said he didn't seem to have anything wrong with him, no wounds or diseases, but he was dying, and doing it pretty quickly. As he started to die, she said the ground began to shake. There were probably still broken tiles in the ER when I was here, but I suppose they've probably replaced them by now. They said the shaking got worse and worse until finally somebody got his heart going again. They put him on a ventilator, and he seemed to have slipped into a coma. They moved him up to the 3rd floor, the top floor at that time, and a couple of months later, I walked into the stairwell and was gone for 50 years. I suppose he's been here ever since. That got me thinking about it, and I decided to look into it further. Kashmir Medical was a haven for the strange and the unexpected, so this was honestly just another day in the ward for me. I talked to David, who had been here for a while, but he just shrugged and said he'd never been in that particular room. I talked to Michael, but he said he'd never got any calls for that room, and the room had never called the switchboard. I was tempted to go up to the 3rd floor and ask the nurses up there, but I wanted to be sure that nothing beyond the pale was happening. Carl was in his office, watching cameras and checking emails, and he laughed when he saw me. "Boy, you just can't stay away from here, can you?" I took a seat and told him about the guy in room 320, the one I was curious about. I told him the story that Frankie had told me, and he nodded along, his face starting to change. He was listening, he was hearing, but he clearly didn't like what he was hearing. I'd known Carl for a while, and his eyes began to narrow as I told him my story, like I might be a danger to the facility. "Do me a favor, John," he said, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "Let this one alone." "What?" I asked, not sure I understood. "Why?" "This is different than ghosts or buggins. This is a matter of hospital security. Can't let you poke your nose into this. If it makes its way into your book, then I don't think it will ever see the light of day." "Why would that be?" I asked, feeling a little defensive. The book was my life in a lot of ways, and I wasn't going to let him threaten me through it. "Kid, there are things here more dangerous than ghosts. There are things here that will leave you in a whole world of trouble. The people at the top like to keep this place the way it is, the way they've made it, and this guy's part of that. No one's allowed in that room, no one who doesn't have their permission, at least. The man in that room is part of my duties, a part that is handed down from security head to security head, and I could probably get in trouble for even talking with you about it." "So he has been here for 50 years then?" I asked, feeling like I was getting a pretty good idea of this. "Yeah. No one knows who he is. No one knows how he got here, but they say that his body must continue to live. If he dies, bad things could happen." "What sort of—" But he cut me off. "Don't ask. I can't tell you, so don't ask. Needless to say, you can't go in there, and I can't let you in there. Leave it alone." I left the security office, but I wasn't done asking questions. There was someone else who might know something, but he was going to be a little harder to find. I could wait for him to show up, but I knew where I could find him, too. I stood in front of the stairwell, trying to manifest my way inside, and when I opened the door, I was looking into the strange world between worlds that people kept getting lost in. I climbed some stairs, calling for him, and by the 3rd landing, I found him waiting. He was wearing the usual red scrubs. I remember what the little boy had said, calling him a dragon, and I wondered what he looked like when he wasn't putting on for me. Was he a dragon? Or was he something worse? "Well, well, well, if it isn't my favorite spirit caller, to what do I owe the visit?" So I explained to him what I was looking into, and it was the first time I'd ever seen his face match Carl's. "Do yourself a favor. Let this one go. That man is beyond even my power, and the higher-ups of the hospital are not the only ones who don't want his life to end." "But why?" I asked, flopping against the wall. "Why is this guy so mysterious?" The orderly sighed. "In this world, there are people who have a destiny. Heroes, kings, people of importance, the kind of people whose stories are written about. Then, there are also people whose existence is tied to the earth and its well-being. This man is important to the continued existence of existence as you know it. Don't look too hard at it, and continue to exist." I had more questions, but there didn't seem to be much else to say. I'd hit a wall, case closed, and there was no way to go on. "If it makes you feel any better," the orderly said, "I tell you these things to keep you off their radar, so you can fulfill your destiny. You may be very important before long, though I doubt you know it. Go, experience some life as it is lived as opposed to how it was lived, and enjoy yourself a little." I left the stairwell and returned to the seat that I realized I'd only evacuated an hour and a half ago. A lot can change in an hour and a half, it seems. "I thought you left," Frankie said, clicking away at the nightly charts. "Did you find what you were after?" "No, but I guess that's okay. Maybe this place has some mysteries that I shouldn't know." "Speaking of mysteries," Frankie said, turning to face me as she hit print on her charts, "I was wondering if maybe you had the answer to one that's been bugging me lately." "Oh yeah?" I asked. "2 mysteries in one night. You're going to spoil me." "Well, I was wondering if you'd like to go out to breakfast with me on Thursday, after you get off work." That caught me off guard. I guess I had never expected the mystery to be whether or not I'd join her outside of work. Like a date?" I asked, my voice only breaking a little on the last part. "I think so," Frankie said. "Dinner would be difficult since I'm your relief for off nights, but breakfast is something we could both enjoy. It might be nice to see you outside of work. Interested?" I nodded. "Sounds like a date," I said, and the two of us sat for a while in companionable silence. That was one mystery I wouldn't mind getting to the bottom of. So much of what we do here is mundane and a little boring. For every lost hiker or animal attack, there's a week or more of nothing. Even our park, which is a little more active than others, can be a little dead sometimes. It was the beginnings of what would become autumn, and the leaves were changing, the animals were getting ready to hibernate, and the guests we had were now interested in taking pictures more than swimming or camping. We still had a fair share of hikers and backpackers, but the season was going to rattle down soon as winter encroached. We'd still have to be here during the winter, but the hours were likely to be scaled back, and the duties would be mostly keeping the place from filling up with snow. So when the call came in about the missing boy, I was just sitting at my desk and trying not to fall asleep. The family had lost their son, and it was all hands on deck. I called the other 2 rangers at my post, and we went down to the Komodo site for briefing. The Komodo site is more like a glorified picnic area, but there are some bathrooms and a playground for the kiddos. It was the last place he had been seen, so we were hoping to get there in time to find him. Ranger Mac was over the search, Drill Instructor Mac as we called him, and he had all of us lined up, along with a couple of the quicker guys from Search and Rescue. "Rangers, Dustin Fern went missing from the playground there." He pointed to the colorful play area. "About 2 hours ago. His parents, Margaret and Dennis Fern, were in the picnic area when they noticed he was gone. The father searched for an hour before they called the park service, and now we're here to see if we can't turn this kid up before nightfall. So let's get at it. Take walkie-talkies, take supplies, get moving. I want check-ins every hour. There's no sense in any of you getting lost too while we're looking for this kid." We split off then, hopes high, and energy peaked, but that was 3 days ago. In the last 3 days, we've been unable to find the kid, and we've been contending with a sudden windstorm that's been buffeting the mountain for days. It's been kicking up little dust devils for a while now, and it's made the kid's tracks difficult to find. Speaking of poor little Dustin, no one else has seen hide nor hair of him either. He left nothing behind to help us out, and it's like the kid just vanished. Before you ask, yes, I went to check the old station in the woods, and no, I couldn't find the forest train. If the kid is riding the rails, then he's doing it alone. Mac insisted that we do this in pairs, and we've been searching non-stop, so there's been plenty of time for chatter. I've been looking around with Jacob. Yeah, that Jacob. And he's been steering us closer and closer to the mountain as time goes on. He justifies this by saying that the mountain isn't that far from the campground, the mountain not being far from most things, and that if the kid was looking for shelter, then he might have headed towards it. There's a lot of caves and things around the base of the mountain. Maybe he took refuge in one of them. We both grabbed our hats as a dust devil rolled past, and as it spun itself out, Jacob watched it go with some interest. I wish the wind would calm down a little bit, I groused as I got back moving, searching the ground for signs that weren't likely to be there. I heard a story once that dust devils were a sign of favor from the mountain owl, Jacob said, as casually as most people would discuss the weather. The mountain owl? I asked, the two of us continuing our search. Yeah. Haven't you seen the kiosk in the park center? I had, and I suddenly remembered what he was talking about. The old Native American legend about the mountain spirit, right? Jacob nodded. My grandma told me about it when I was little. She had a touch of the Native American blood in her, at least she claimed to, and she had grown up in the community and heard a lot of the old stories. The mountain god, just called the Great Owl by the locals, was something she talked about a lot. He apparently brought the winds, moved the rains, and protected the tribes from outsiders. I guess he did a pretty good job, until the people with the guns came along. I had to plant my feet as another dust devil tried to push me into the nearest tree. What was he supposed to do? I asked, glancing around as we talked and finding my gaze straying back to the dust devil. He protects the tribe, but he also protected the kids. There was a story she used to tell about a kid who was lost in the woods, who was taken by the owl for 7 days and 7 nights. When the search party found him, the kid said the owl spirit had fed him and kept him safe. He also claimed to have shared great knowledge with him, and the kid had no idea how much time had passed. He was supposed to have gone on to be a great chief or spiritual leader or both, and he attributed the knowledge he had gained from the owl to his success. Keep in mind, this was a long, long time ago, before the settlers ever got here, so who knows if there's any truth to it or not. I watched it go, the little tornado heading back towards the mountain before fizzling out. Did the legend happen to say how they found the kid? Jacob thought about it for a moment. Not really, only that they did. The kiosk in the main center says the natives sometimes attributed the winds to the owl spirit, and that those who followed them may find something they seek. I'd taken a couple of steps towards the track the dust devil had been going on, when my radio crackled and Ranger Mac came over. Group 2B, status report. I lifted the headset to my mouth and told him that we had no updates at the moment. Affirmative. Return to the center. We'll get another team out there so you can get some rest. Jacob sighed. Looks like our shift's over. Let's go get some grub and maybe a nap. I kept looking at the mountain, but between my yawns and my growling stomach, I knew it was time to pack it in. Jacob and I were eating chili in the mess tent when I heard a few of the other search parties talking. The wind is getting rough out there, one of them was saying. It's probably about to drop a real frog drowner on us. Nah, said Nash, another one of the rangers from my post. It's just a geezer. It's too late in the season for a real hard rain. It's strange, though, he said, getting chili in his beard as he scratched it with a spoon. It almost seems to be pushing us towards something. You think? I asked, drawing the attention of both of the older men. Well, yeah. Haven't you noticed? It's been pushing us towards the mountain. I don't know if I believe it's a sign or something, but it's damn weird." "Has anyone checked around the mountain?" asked the first guy. "Nope," said Nash. "It's too far. The little fellow would have had to walk damn near 3 miles to get there. We'd have found something by now if he had." "Well," Jacob piped up, "they better find him soon. After 4 days, they're likely to scale it back. After 7, they'll call it. Most of us will be sent back to our post after tomorrow." As I sat there eating, listening to them talk about their own searches, I looked back at the mountain and couldn't help but listen to the wind and remember what Jacob had said. It was pretty unlikely that he was at the mountain. Nash was right about that, but the wind did seem to be pushing us in that direction. It had helped the natives find things. Maybe it was trying to help us, too. Jacob stopped me as I started heading towards the mountain, asking me where I was going. I told him I was going to go have a look around the base of the mountain, and instead of trying to stop me, he offered to come along. "That's worth crossing off, if nothing else," he said, and the two of us headed into the woods. The sun was setting, and pretty soon we had our flashlights out as the wind sent the trees rattling. The park wasn't all that different at night, but you definitely had to watch where you stepped. We came out of the thick woods and into the scraggy area between the trees and the mountain. The wind was really whipping up now, and instead of planting myself against it, I let it pull me. I could hear an owl not too far away, though it sounded like a normal-sized owl instead of some monster spirit bird. The closer we got, the more it seemed to be pulling us towards the southern face. There was a big cave system near there, but I couldn't imagine anyone going there after dark. The caves on this side of the mountain would be full of shale and loose rocks, and they'd be pretty uncomfortable for a kid sleeping rough. The more the wind pushed and the more the dust devils blew, the more I began to think I was right, though. When we found the cave empty, it took some of the starch out of my sails. "Look," Jacob half whispered, and I pointed my light into the corner he'd been indicating. There, curled up on a nest of leaves and sticks, was the kid. He looked dirty, probably hungry, but none the worse for wear. We scooped him up. He was dehydrated and wobbly, and we came back into the rescue camp like conquering heroes. Mrs. Fern took her son from me, and I wasn't sure the kid was going to touch ground again until he was 30. Jacob and I got accommodations from the Park Service, and the governor sent us both medals for a job well done. For the kid's part, he said he'd seen a squirrel and went chasing after it, getting lost before he knew what had happened. He wandered around in the woods, calling for help and looking for his parents, and then fallen asleep under a tree. He woke up in the cave. Someone had put him in the little nest, and every now and again, he would find food lying on the floor. It was usually granola bars or some kind of berries, but it had kept him fed until we found him. Sometimes there were bottles of water, too, but they had been less frequent. The kid didn't know where he was, so he had tried staying put until we found him, and it was a lucky thing we had. The paramedics who looked over him said that he'd probably have succumbed to dehydration in a couple of days if he hadn't started getting regular water, and that made his rescue all the more heroic as far as anyone else was concerned. Personally, I was just glad to get back to doing nothing until the park's next disaster comes our way. "Are you from Bike Meals?" asked the kid behind the counter as Brandon came in under the sound of the bell. "That's me. You got the food ready?" Brandon asked. The kid behind the counter smiled as he set the bags down. Brandon had trouble with some of the food places ever since starting with Bike Meals, but Lewis's Subs was not one of them. Lewis was one of those special individuals who had come to Kashmir and immediately began trying to make the town a little bit better, kind of like Brandon's boss, John. John had come from outside Kashmir, as most of them had, and he had a great idea for a service that brought food to people's houses. They would call their orders into the hub, an operator would call it into the restaurant after getting their mobile payment, and then they would dispatch one of their bike delivery guys to go pick it up and take it to them. "It kind of reminds me of this thing we had where I came from," John would say, while scratching his head. "And if I think really hard, sometimes I can kind of remember it. It's foggy, but I remember it involved bringing food to people's houses, so they didn't have to go out and get it. I really think the people of Kashmir would enjoy having something like that." Brandon didn't know what he was talking about, but it served his purpose and helped keep a roof over his head, so he was more than happy to help John with his new business. "Any plans this weekend?" the kid asked Brandon as he grabbed up the bags. "Why, yes," Brandon wanted to say to him. "I plan on getting the last of my funds together so I can summon the Whispering God from the depths of my dreams." What he actually said was, maybe just hang out at home with some friends. "Sounds like a pretty good weekend. Well, you enjoy yourself, man, and we'll see you next time." Brandon thanked him and brought the food to the bike out in front of the restaurant. John had been kind enough to give all of them bikes with large baskets on the front so they could transport the food they took to the people. Bike Meals was really just a Kashmir institution, so it wasn't as if they had to go very far. John liked the fact that he got exercise. He could pedal an upwards of 10 miles a day on a busy day, and it kept him in great shape. He also liked that it put him in contact with interesting people. People like Casey Flynn, Brandon reflected. Casey Flynn had been the catalyst for all of this. Brandon couldn't remember his childhood. Couldn't even remember what he'd been doing 5 years ago before he came here. But he was pretty sure he'd been having the dreams since before he got here. The dreams were always the same. He was standing in an empty field and listening to someone quietly whisper. He wasn't sure what they were whispering. He couldn't quite hear that, but their words fell from the sky like manna, and Brandon now understood that the words came from something much larger than his understanding. At first, he'd been afraid of the whispers. He had dreaded the nights he would have the dreams, something that was happening more frequently after he arrived in Kashmir, and it had made it hard to keep a steady job. The dreams would wake him up, feed his insomnia sometimes, and that made it difficult to function throughout the day. It was hard to fall asleep when you were on a bike, however, and so bike meals were a good fit. Brandon often rode so hard and so long that he was too tired to even really notice the dreams. But that had been past Brandon. Now, he knew better than to ignore the whispering one, and Casey had helped him make that discovery. Casey was an interesting individual. He delivered food to Casey every day, had begun to be asked for his deliveries personally, and that had led him to hang around and talk to the old guy a little. Casey was no spring chicken. He was old and bald and pushing 70, but he had a wealth of knowledge. He was on Social Security, and he seemed to split his pension between occult research, bike meals, and his bills. He had books that you probably couldn't check out at the local library, books in languages that Brandon couldn't read. And Casey knew what was in all of them. He had one of those keys of Solomon, the ones that talk about hierarchies of demons in hell, and he had shown Brandon a lot of things you couldn't find on Google. Their friendship had begun slowly. Casey liked to order food from Lewis's subs, and he said that Brandon was one of the few delivery guys who got it to him without crushing the chips or mashing the bread. Brandon had given him his food and left at first, but before long he had noticed the books Casey read and had questions. Casey, for his part, was glad to have someone to talk with, and that was how Brandon had begun to tell him about his dreams. Casey looked ravenous as he listened to Brandon tell him about the dreams, and when he finished, the old man told him something he'd been waiting for, though he didn't know it. "These dreams are not nightmares. You're being contacted by an elder god. Casey had absorbed the information like a sponge, and the more Brandon told him, the more Casey told him. Casey suggested he start a journal, something to write down what he heard from the whispering entity. And Brandon had said that he would give it a try. Dream journaling was hard. It was something you had to work at, but after a year, Brandon had gotten pretty good at it. After a year of listening to those hollow whispers, those spidery condemnations, Brandon began to understand some of what was being said. Well, not understand. Understanding would have brought knowledge. Brandon began to transpose the words, and even though the words meant nothing to him, they meant something to Casey. He is telling you what you must gather in order to make his transition into this world. It's rare to be given such an opportunity. You should feel honored and moved to help him. From then on, Brandon had been doing just that. Punctual as always, my boy, Casey said as Brandon pulled up with his lunch. Come, sit. Tell me what news you have from the Whispering One. Brandon took out his journal and handed it to Casey, along with his sub. I marked down some new things I heard. I believe I've deciphered nearly all of it. Casey read over the journal, nodding. You do impeccable work, my boy. Did you finish the translation from yesterday? Brandon asked. Casey made a sound as he bit into the roast beef and cheese, his favorite, and wiped mayo on the arm of his plastic chair before grabbing a sheet of paper off the end table. Brandon had to lurch forward to grab the ashtray he nearly upset. The paper in his hands dribbled with ash flakes as he brought it out, and when the table was set to rights, he took it from the old man. Just finished an hour ago. Let us hope that your Whispering One is fond of sub sandwiches. I don't know how I would get by without Lewis and his subs. Brandon looked over the list, his brow crinkling as his hands began to shake. These candles, are you sure? They aren't the same ones as last week. Ah, yes, Casey said, popping a finger into his mouth before moving to the next. That was a mistake on my part. The translation wasn't precisely what I thought it was. Sorry if that caused any problems. Brandon chewed his lips. The ritual called for 5 blood-red candles of bale tallow, 5 candles of sky blue tallow, 5 candles of meltron tallow, 5 candles of gemstone tallow. Brandon had the 5 red ones and the 5 blue ones, but the week before the ritual had called for 5 mint tallow candles. Meltron, however, sounded expensive, and now Brandon had 5 useless green candles that had cost him nearly $30. There was also blessed chalk to buy, gravestone ash to scavenge. He would need 5 pounds of red brick clay, and Brandon squinted at the last of it before looking up at Casey. A complete hawk skeleton. Indeed, Casey said, crumbling up the paper from his sub and tossing it into the corner where a dozen others sat in various states of decomposition. Where am I supposed to get a complete hawk skeleton? Brandon asked. I have been led to believe, Casey said as he reached for the chips within the bag, that most hawks have a full skeleton inside them. The hawk is the least of your worries. Some of these candles will be dear, and gravestone ash is not something most people still have. The bill will not be cheap, young sir. Not cheap at all. Brandon nodded, folding the paper up and putting it into his pocket. Well, best get back to work then. See you tomorrow, Casey. And you, Brandon, do tell your master I say hello. Brandon was off, heading back to the center for another delivery. His whispering one could not arrive on his own, and each meal delivered got him one step closer to fruition. He would see the source of those whispers, though he prayed he wouldn't be as old as Casey by the time he saw the one who whispered so. Earl looked up from his lunch and smiled. Right on time, as usual. He opened the door to his little one-bedroom shed and found Candace standing there with a coffee for her and a latte for him. He could smell the cold foam from here, and it made him grin as she held it out to him. Cold foam, just the way you like it. I also found that Daryl Childers novel you were looking for, she said, taking the paperback out from under her arm. Earl was surprised, but pleasantly so. He'd been looking for this book for almost a week, and the fact that she had found it so easily had really surprised him. Online it was going for $70 to $80 a copy, but he doubted she had paid that much for it. Having a friend who owned a second-hand store definitely had its benefits. "That's amazing. What do I owe you?" he asked, as he reached out to take the coffee and the book. "Oh, don't worry about it," Candace said, as she took a sip of her coffee. "It's just something I had lying around the shop." Earl left the book inside, and the two of them took a stroll around the graveyard as they talked about whatever they wanted to. This had been going on for a couple of weeks, and Earl was pleasantly surprised by their friendship and how it had blossomed. He knew others would look at it and think something else was going on, but Earl felt secure in the idea that both of them were just friends. He would not have any problem dating someone like Candace, but he couldn't imagine what she would see in someone like him. Earl was just the gravekeeper, and Candace was a sophisticated woman who dealt in antiques and other such things. The fact that she was willing to be friends with him was more than enough for Earl. "Hey there, Earl. See, your lady is back." Earl smiled and gave a covert nod to Mr. Abernathy, as Candace told him about the older couple that had come in looking for an antique armoire the week before. The idea that she might have her own secrets in a town like Kashmir never even occurred to him. In the end, they just opted for this old refurbished credenza that I had in the back since opening day. It's crazy what people want sometimes. "Sounds like it," Earl agreed. "I had a couple sold on a beautiful plot for their mother, but they decided on a much cheaper one with a worse view. I don't think people realize that a great view is beyond price." Candace laughed. "I suppose it does make visits a lot more pleasant." Earl opened his mouth to say something, but turned it into a laugh instead. "Yeah, that's true. So few come to visit, too, so every little bit helps." They were quiet for a moment as they strolled amongst the tombstones. It was nice out today. Summer was winding down, and the days were becoming less stifling. Autumn was on its way, and soon the Halloween decorations would be making a return appearance. It was Earl's favorite time of the year, but it had arrived earlier than expected. This whole year had gone by before he knew it, and soon it would be... What was the year? Earl found he couldn't remember. He supposed it didn't matter. The year would go on as it had for the years before, and if the good Lord willed it, then Earl would still be here to see the next one. He saw Mrs. Malone, the plump ghost in the corner grave, incline her head to him as he went by, and he gave her a little wave as he and Candace turned to walk the perimeter in the other direction. Mrs. Malone was a woman of few words, but she seemed to approve of Earl's new interest. Most of the ghosts that resided here approved of Candace. They knew that Earl would be happier with a new friend, and they were supportive of his choice. Well, some of them were. A few of them, like the faceless shade that hovered over the grave of Edmund Tully, said nothing. Whether they approved or not, Earl did not know, but they kept their silence, and he kept his. "It's so beautiful here, Earl. I don't know how you get any real work done." "I'd do nothing but dither around the graveyard and pick flowers all day." "Not in the summertime, you wouldn't," Earl said with a chuckle. "In the summertime, I can barely get any work done for the heat. But I love the graveyard at all times of the year. I think that's why I was called to work here. It's not the work that calls me, but the people who are buried here. I take care of them in a lot of ways, and they take care of me." Candace gave him a strange look, like she thought he might be joking, but when he didn't laugh, she just looked away and counted the headstones. "How many people are buried out here, Earl?" she asked suddenly. Earl thought about it. "Oh, I'd say about 300 or 400. Not as many as you might think, but then again, we don't have the land or the population for a mass burial like that." "Will there be room for me when my time comes?" A question like that would have been off-putting to most people, but Earl was used to dealing with questions like that and thinking about similar topics himself. He had often wondered who would bury him when his time came, who would put him in the ground when it was his turn to rest beneath the soil. "Of course, but not for many years yet, I would hope." "Me too," Cassandra said, "but one never knows these days, do they?" They stopped beside a stone bench, and Earl felt like there was something bothering her. They'd been having their morning meetups for about 2 weeks, but it was strange how quickly you could feel like you knew someone. Talking with Candace was like talking with an old friend, one of his fishing buddies, or someone he'd known from high school. And he felt sure that something was bothering her. Maybe it was something he could help with, and maybe, if it wasn't, he thought talking about it might make her feel a little bit better. "Cassandra, is there something bothering you? You can tell me. I won't think it's silly or laugh about it." Cassandra gave him an odd look, like she suspected that he might be reading her mind. But she smiled and looked away a moment later, feeling silly. "It's nothing, Earl. I wouldn't want to bother you with my problems." Earl took a seat on the bench and patted the spot next to him, encouraging her to sit. "They say that the gravekeeper makes a pretty good secret keeper, too. Who else have I got to tell?" Cassandra seemed to think about it quickly, and then decided she might trust Earl, at least with this. She sat down next to him, settling her skirts as she did so. It'd be too cold for skirts in a few months, and she wanted to feel the sun on her legs before the snow came in and consigned her to pants for the winter months. I have no proof. It's not like I've seen anybody or suspect anyone, but I feel like someone is watching me." "Well, you are a rather attractive young woman," Earl said as the color crept up his neck. "I'm sure there's more than a few men in town who have seen you and thought about maybe asking you out to a movie or a milkshake or something." "No, Earl, not like that. I mean, I feel like someone is hunting me. I feel like when I'm out and about, there's a wolf stalking me. I know how silly that sounds, but it's the truth. Now that the store is doing a little better, I wonder if I might have picked up some secret admirer or a stalker or something." That made Earl feel several different feelings. He was afraid for his new friend, of course, but he was also mad that someone would stalk Cassandra. Cassandra was such a nice girl. She thought of everyone before herself, and the idea that someone might want to hurt her or do something to her that she didn't want to do was infuriating. It made Earl want to go out right now and track this person down, the same way he might a deer or some dangerous animal in the woods during hunting season. Instead, he just gripped his hands in his lap and tried not to yell when he answered her back. That's terrible, Cassandra. Do you have any idea who it is? Maybe it's someone I can talk to and get them to leave you alone. Cassandra shook her head. No, but I don't feel like they're watching me when I'm here. I feel safe here. I feel safe with you, Earl. I like to come here and walk with you because it's one of the few times I don't feel like I'm being watched. I don't like those new cameras in town either. They make me feel weird, like it's the same person watching me through the camera, the same one who's stalking me. Earl agreed. He didn't much care for those new cameras either. He talked to the sheriff about them, but Sheriff Guthrie didn't seem to be taking them very seriously. He had thought that the sheriff might have hung them up, part of some new kind of citywide surveillance, but some of the guys down at the general store said it had been a guy in a white van in a uniform with an eagle on it. One of them thought it might be the guy who sometimes lurked around town, but they couldn't be sure. What Earl could be sure of was that he wanted to protect Cassandra. Well, you can come here any time you want. I like having you around. She leaned against him, but Earl had realized they were closer than he thought to a place he'd been avoiding. Mrs. Pearson was lying on her gravestone and looking at the sky, seemingly oblivious of them. Thank you, Earl, Cassandra whispered, getting up and brushing off her skirt. I'd better get back to the shop. Same time tomorrow? You bet, Earl said, and as Cassandra made her way to the shop, Earl headed back to his shack. Mrs. Pearson was going to love the new book. I was a security guard at the Kawakala Mall in the early 2000s, back when malls roamed the land like capitalistic buffalo. It wasn't glamorous. I could have made more with the sheriff's office or at the prison the next town over, but it was a 9 to 9, 4 days a week, and the insurance kept me out of the hospital, and the pay kept me out of the poorhouse. The mall insisted on this uniform that made us look like police officers in a kid's cartoon. Blue shirt, black pants, shiny shoes, and a square hat with a plastic badge on it. We weren't armed. They wouldn't even let us carry mace, but it was a mall, so most of the time I was just collaring unruly teens or shoplifters. I'd played football in high school and college, at least until I damaged my left tendon somehow, so I wasn't a small guy. I'd been keeping in shape so my muscles didn't turn to mush, and I was pretty intimidating when I needed to be, even though I looked like an extra from the police academy. The mall was huge, but what always caught my eye, what had caught my eye ever since I was a little kid, was the mural in the food court. Kawakala Mall, or the land it sat on at least, had been an Indian village back before the Civil War. The natives had been victims of westward expansion, and the town had turned them into a tourist attraction years later. All the actual Kawakala Indians, if that was even the name their tribe had been shipped off to reservations near Canada. But that didn't stop the townsfolk from having a festival about their victory over the savage Indians every year. Local legends state that the settlers had adopted the name as a sort of screw you to the natives they had stolen the land from, but they hadn't gotten away scot-free. The tribe had been large, and they had been fighters. Local legend also said they had a spiritual leader who acted as their chief, and he had used something to poison the crops and make the townspeople scared of the woods. Scared or not, the settlers had ambushed them on the spot where the mall stands and killed them to a man. Their women and children had been taken to the reservation. The chief had died here too, falling in the same battle that had devastated his people, and now my town celebrated it every year. If that sounds morbid and a little bit screwed up to you, then you're not alone. The members of the tribe who returned after generations of reservation life usually protested the celebration, but no one seems to pay them much mind. I don't like it, but it's one of our biggest festivals, and I do like funnel cake. Anyway, the mural depicts that battle, but the artist must have had a really sick sense of humor. All the natives in the drawing are smiling like they know a secret that no one else does. There are 10 in all, I counted, and you can see the settlers with their guns as they surround them. The natives have spears and bows, despite the fact that historically they had guns at this point, and they look half crazed as they stare out from the 30-foot-tall mural. I remember having nightmares about those Indians when I was a kid, and they always creeped me out. Now, as an adult, I get to look at them every day from 9 to 9. Neat, huh? Anyway, I tell you all this to let you know about the weird incident that happened that night in 2003. The mall closed at 9 o'clock every day. When I say closed, I mean closed. Doors closed, cages down, no one inside. We didn't even do night security. We don't do overnight stocking, and we do all our janitorial stuff in the early morning. I didn't understand why, but I followed orders. I was always gone before it became a problem anyway. Until tonight. It was a mess. We had 5 teenagers in the mall, all of them drunk as lords, and making problems for everyone. They had started in Dillard's, harassing staff and pushing things over, but then we lost them in one of the service hallways, and we didn't find them again until they popped up in the food court. They blended for a few minutes, right up until they appeared at Wetzel's Pretzels and got irrationally angry because they didn't have any churros done right then. They threw a chair through the display and then moved on before we could catch them, going to KB Toys and causing a scene. That was where we got them, all of them having a massive lightsaber battle in the middle of the store and looking at us like deer caught in headlights when we yelled at them. We had the cops there by that point, but it was still a mess. We all got whacked with lightsabers. One of them puked up Everclear onto me. It's a smell that's hard to forget. And we had to drag 5 half-drunk kids out of the mall and through the food court. The icing on the cake was that all this happened at 7:30, about an hour and a half before closing time. By 8:50, I was still doing paperwork on the incident, and when Jeremy, the closing guard, came to tell me it was time to lock up, I told him I'd do it when I was done, and he could go ahead and go. He looked at me like I was insane. Man, you know as well as I do that we all gotta be out of here by 9. That's policy. I know, but if I don't get this done, it's gonna be my ass. The cops and the security head want it by tomorrow. Don't worry, Jeremy, I'll lock the place up before I leave. Jeremy looked hesitant, but finally gave in and said he would lock the front door behind him when he left. Just don't be here too late, Jeremy warned. You know how the boss gets. I said I would, and the sound of his keys was the only thing in the quiet mall halls, other than the muzak that seemed to ooze in from the mall proper. Even that was gone after a while. I was left with the infrequent overhead announcements that went off every 10 to 15 minutes, and the soft hum of the air conditioner. I swiped at my eyes as the paperwork came together, my drowsiness getting the better of me as my words swam on the page. I decided that a cup of coffee would be just what I needed to get through this. It was 10 o'clock, way past closing time, and I was starting to feel those 13 hours. Luckily, I was off the next day, so I could rest a bit before my shift on Thursday. As I slipped my quarter into the coffee machine at the end of the security corridor, punching the number for a large and listening to it chug away, I turned my head when I heard something crash out in the mall proper. It was after 10. No one was supposed to be here. Hell, I wasn't supposed to be here. So, There should have been no one here to knock something over. The lights beyond the security hallway were dim, the evening lighting in the mall. And as I came up the hall towards the shadowed area, I heard something soft moving up towards the fountain that lay further up. It wasn't the running feet I was used to hearing. This was not the slap of tennis shoes or the clap of plastic sandals. This sounded more like slippers, something form-fitting. And when I came into the mall, I saw the source of the noise almost immediately. There was a stand nearby, one of those little pop-up stalls that sold jewelry or beepers, and someone had defaced it. This particular one sold hats and sunglasses, the snap brims and the obnoxiously huge reflective glasses that some of the young security guards wore, and there were taxidermy animals attached to it so that they could draw in the crowds they were looking to sell to. Someone had detached the hawk from the top of it, and they had knocked the foot off as well. The foot was still attached with the wire as it hung from the top of the stand, but the stuffed bird was lying on the floor in a less than majestic manner. "Hello?" I called, taking out my mag light and shining it around as I looked for anyone who might still be in the mall. There was nothing other than the hum of the air conditioner and the buzz of the overheads, and the more I thought about it, the sillier I felt for thinking this had been done by someone. The bird had simply fallen when its leg collapsed under it. It was just bad craftsmanship, and I was being jumpy. I went back to get my coffee, taking some careful sips as I went back to my paperwork. I was being a goose, and the quicker I got this done, the quicker I could get out of here. It was nearly done anyway. I was in the home stretch, but the more I tried to concentrate on my description of the events, the more I heard something going on in the mall. It was nothing as dramatic, just little noises, things you could only notice if it was dead quiet. I probably didn't fill everything out the way I should have, but I started rushing a little as my nerves began to fray. The noises were making me jumpy. There shouldn't be any noise in the mall, but I couldn't be sure of that. I had never been here past 9. It wasn't allowed, so who knew what the usual noises were in this place? I ground my teeth together as I made an ink stain on the page and tried to calm down so I didn't ruin all my work. It was a pain to have to do these things in triplicate, but I was about half done and trying to fly through the rest so I could get home. It was 11:30 by the time I finished up, and as I put the correct papers in the correct manila envelopes, I prepared to leave. I could feel the neck hair rising at the thought of going out into the mall. It was dark out there, I'd seen that, and I knew I'd have to go past the fountain, through the dark stores, and then out the food court so I could leave. I shouldn't be scared. I'd done this 100 times in the daytime, but I suddenly understood why they didn't want anyone here past 9 o'clock. The mall felt alien to me as I stepped out of the security hallway, and as I walked towards the food court, I felt my teeth come together in a nervous clack. I turned my head a little as I came past the Abercrombie & Fitch, feeling eyes on me as I went. I turned suddenly as I passed the GameStop, the sound of soft feet thundering not far from me as something stalked me through the tiled halls. My head was snapping from side to side as I walked past the Yankee Candle Company, and that was where I saw one of them. He ducked behind the edge of a bench, but I saw him before he melted into the shadows. He was shirtless, his skin tanned and his hair disappearing down his back. I couldn't see what he had in his hand, but it was easy to imagine a knife or a spear or a bow. It was his eyes that were the worst. His eyes were merry, dancing with pleasure, like an animal that enjoys the chase more than the kill. Those eyes were familiar, too. I'd seen them before, but I couldn't have said where right then. I kept going, pretending I hadn't seen him, but I heard other feet moving to join him. I started walking faster, not sure what was going on here, but I knew I had to get outside so I could use the payphone to call the police. Someone, a group of someones, had gotten into the mall, and they would likely be very interested in stopping me from letting anyone know about it. I could hear them behind me, so there was no going back to the security office. I had to get to the payphone, get out of the mall. I had to do it quickly. As the food court came into view, I broke my rule and started running. I could hear them speeding up too, their soft slippers booming on the tiles as they ran. But even in my haste, I still glanced up at the mural. It was a habit. I couldn't not do it. And that was when I saw it. It almost made me stop, but my fear and adrenaline only made me take it in all the quicker. The natives in the mural were gone, just gone. And as I glanced behind me, I found where they had gone. There were 5 of them behind me now, their faces frozen in those cannibal grins that the artist had given them. They had knives and spears in hands. One of them was even drawing back a bow, and I realized there would be no escape with them so close behind me. I decided to take a risk, and I turned suddenly and headed for the bathrooms. They skated on the tiles, their hide shoes not getting the purchase they wanted, and I had just enough time to barrel into the maintenance closet and bar the door. I could hear them banging on it, slamming into the metal as they tried to get me. I had engaged the lock and shoved whatever crap I could find against the door, but I wasn't sure it was enough. For the rest of the night, I huddled in the corner and prayed they wouldn't get me. I don't know when I passed out, my body finally stopping, but when the banging started again, it was different than it had been before. "Hello?" came a voice from the outside. "Hello? Is someone in there? You need to come out. I've already called the police, so you'll probably want to be gone before they get here." I recognized that voice. It was Greg from Custodial. I was holed up in the little room where he kept his stuff. He thought I was a burglar. I sat up and opened the door, Greg looking shocked when he saw me. It appeared I had some explaining to do. Greg got me a coffee and sat me down in the empty food court. I was shaking, my eyes flying to the mural that had been empty just the night before. Now it was filled once again with the grinning faces of the natives, and their eyes seemed intent on me. I could swear they were moving as I sat and drank coffee slowly, their eyes watching me like they had the night before. It was extremely unsettling, and it took everything I had to keep sitting there as Greg asked me what was happening. "So," Greg said, watching as the other guys gave me and my rumpled security guard uniform a wide berth, "you want to talk about why you were hiding in my broom closet?" I didn't, not really, but I realized I needed to get out in front of this if I wanted everyone to think I was still sane. "Well, Greg, I was chased through the mall last night. Your closet made a convenient hiding place." Greg looked a little scared. "Chased? By who? Some customer stay after closing time or something?" I shook my head. "I don't know. I'd stayed to do some paperwork," but Greg looked stricken at this. "You stayed after closing time? You know you can't do that. Jesus, are you okay? Do you need to go to the hospital?" That was a bit of an odd statement. It made me start to wonder what Greg knew. "No, I'm okay. I had to finish up that paperwork. You know, from the incident yesterday." I filled him in on the particulars, Greg still looking like he might shiver out of his socks. And then I got to how I had told Jeremy to go home, that I would finish up, and Greg seemed relieved. I think when I mentioned that Jeremy and I had been involved in the incident, he had wondered if he needed to start looking for 2 people, but the knowledge that I hadn't dragged the kid along seemed to make him feel a little better. Then I described the noises and the people who followed me, and Greg just shook his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Jesus, I can't believe it. You got to talk to the boss. You have to make a report. I started to object, but he put a hand up. If you don't, I will. This is one of those rules that we do not break. You have to leave at 9 o'clock. You have to. It's policy, and it's for your safety. Why do you think we have to get here at 6 a.m. to clean before we open at 9? No one can be here after dark. No one. Or... He paused, swallowing something before it could come out. Or someone could get hurt. I'd started to ask him if he knew anything about the mural and the natives that came from it. But someone called my name then, and I turned around to see Mr. Martin, the general manager, coming in with a fresh cup of Dunkin' coffee and a cruller. He asked what I was still doing here, and when Greg said he had found me in a janitor's closet, I was immediately spirited up to the boss's office. He called my boss, the head of security, and told him where he had found me and asked him to come in immediately so we could sort this out. When that was done, he put the phone down and looked at me seriously. I had never actually been in the same room with Mr. Martin. He had hired me in so much as he had signed off on my employment paperwork. Mr. Garvis was my boss, the head of security, and if he was coming in, then maybe I might be able to save my job. Mr. Garvis, Mr. Call Me Phil kid, everyone does, was a nice guy, and he liked me. I wasn't a slouch, I did my paperwork, and I tried to be more than just a glorified rent-a-cop. He had said that if I played my cards right, I might have his job one day. But as Mr. Martin sat across from me, fingers steepled in a decidedly wizard fashion, I started to wonder if I'd still be employed by the end of the day. Let me start by saying that this is extremely irregular. Do you understand that the rules are there for a reason? We don't just tell you to be out of the mall by 9 o'clock because we think it's funny. This is a very real... He weighed his words carefully. There are rules, and we follow them, or we lose our jobs. Now, I talked to Philip, and he says you're one of his best guys. He doesn't want to fire you, so I suppose I just have to make sure of what exactly happened to you. Why don't you tell me what led you to be trapped in the janitor's closet? So I told him a story. It wasn't the truth, but I felt it might be a more coherent story. I told him a group of people had broken in after hours. I told him how they'd been dressed as Native Americans and how they had potentially had keys to the place. I told him how they had run amok and how they had chased me when I went to leave. I told him how I'd been doing paperwork after the events of the night before, and how the police paperwork had been done before I went home because of security protocol. It also had to be done in triplicate, one for Mr. Garvis, one for the police, and one for him, and how that had taken me a while. I told him how I'd heard noises, how I'd gone to investigate, and how when I went to leave, I'd been chased. I hid in the closet. They had tried to get into the closet, and when they couldn't, they had left. I'd stayed there, fearing they were waiting for me to leave so they could jump me, and I must have passed out. Mr. Martin thought about this as he drank his coffee, his eyes seeming to judge whether I was holding anything back. That was all you saw, right? He finally asked. Yes, sir, I said. I hid because I didn't want to be killed. I didn't know what their intentions were, but they seemed pretty angry. He nodded, getting up so he could look out the window in his office that overlooked the food court. The custodians were just getting started down there, cleaning and tidying and taking out the trash, and Mr. Martin seemed to watch them for an eternity. You know, you aren't the first person to tell me about strangers in the mall. I didn't say anything. He didn't seem to want an answer. We used to be open till 11. We used to keep the movie theater open till 2 a.m. When the mall first opened, you could damn near shop till midnight. But that was when the weird things started happening. People started going missing. People started getting hurt. This area gets rough after dark, son. We got worried about the staff, about the guests. We started closing down at 9. Now, no one stays past 9. No one. Oh, sure, the Cineplex complains about losing revenue, and the stores complain about having to herd everyone out by 8:30. But the problem stopped. You've been here a while, haven't you? 2 years, sir, I said, still only speaking when spoken to. I'd learned early in life how to take an ass chewing, with the least amount of teeth marks. Did anyone ever tell you about Jim Morris? No, sir. Not surprising, Mr. Martin said, still looking out over his kingdom. Jim Morris was the old head of security here, back when the mall opened in '82. He'd been a cop for 20 years, retired from the force, but his wife got cancer, and his retirement got cut short. When people started getting hurt, Jim blamed the protesters. Protesters, sir? I asked, not sure what he meant. The groups of Native American activists never usually make it off Main Street these days, and it was rare to see them at the mall unless it was to buy clothes or glower at the mural. Surely you remember when the mall was opened, he said, glancing at me before turning back to the window. Or maybe you don't. The same sort of protesters who tote signs during the festival and the Down Home Days celebration started out here. They said this was tribal land and we had no right to it. They claimed this was the site of a major tragedy for the tribes and that we should take our mall elsewhere. Anyway, Jim thought it was them. All the witnesses said it was guys in buckskin with feathers in their hair, and Jim wanted them brought to justice. After they killed the third person, I didn't have a lot of choice but to cut back the operation hours of the mall. People were scared. Scared people just want things to go back to normal. Not Jim, though. They had hurt people, killed people on his watch, and Jim was mad as hell about it. What happened to him? I asked, unable to stop myself. He stuck around after closing. He said he wanted to watch cameras and catch the bastards in the act. I begged him not to. The police were already doing regular patrols, but he insisted. He stayed, and the next day they found him dead. Mr. Martin pointed to the fountain down in the food court. He was in that fountain, his gun shot empty, and his throat cut like an animal. I never let anyone stay past 9 again. Strangely enough, that stopped it. I don't know why. I don't care why. People are told to head for the food court at 8:30, and by 9, the doors are closed. End of story. Phil likes you. I like you. But if this happens again, I'll fire you myself. Am I understood? That was about the time Mr. Garvis came in, saying he'd gotten here as fast as he could, and Mr. Martin told me I was free to go, after I said I understood. And I did. I understood that something was happening, maybe something Mr. Martin understood more about than he cared to say, and that it was something dangerous. Mr. Garvis said to come with him, and we had a similar conversation in his office. Mr. Garvis praised my desire to finish up my business, praised my immaculate paperwork, but told me in no uncertain terms that this could not happen again. You're a good kid. You have a bright future in this mall. I don't want to see you throw it all away over something like this. If this happens again, just take the paperwork home and do it. I'll collect it the next day, no problem. Again, I commend your desire to get everything in on time, but you have to be smart while you do it. Are you on the schedule today? No, sir. Today's my off day. Good. Go get some rest. Just be safe in the future. Neither Mr. Martin nor I think you need a write-up for this, so don't worry about any of that. Get some rest, and thank you for trying to keep the mall safe. As I was leaving, Greg stopped me. Hey, you forgot your coffee, he said. I put a little something in there for you, but maybe wait till you get to your car to take a sip. Be safe, kid. The cup was suspiciously light, and when I got in my car and took the lid off, I found a note inside. Come to Mel's tonight at 7. I want to know what you saw and talk a little more about it. I pulled up outside of Mel's that afternoon, full of questions. I hadn't slept a lot that day, but I'd get some rest that night after I got my answers. I could see Greg's little car was parked in a lot out front, so I figured he had been there for a little while. He had to clean the mall tomorrow morning, so he probably wouldn't be here late. If I was going to get answers to my questions, then I would need to be quick about it. Greg was sitting on a stool near the back of the bar, and he had someone else with him, someone I didn't know. The guy sitting beside him had long, dark hair and a tanned complexion. I stopped for a moment when I saw him because it looked like someone had taken one of the natives off the mural. He wasn't grinning, however. In fact, this fellow was stone-faced as he listened to Greg talk. The two looked up as I came in, and Greg smiled as he waved me over. There you are. Weren't sure we'd see you. This is Terry. He's the tribal representative for Kawakala. I really wish they would change that name, Terry said with a roll of his eyes. It's not even like it means anything. It's just something vaguely native they slapped together. Terry is also one of the chairmen for the protests that are going on during events he finds to be unseemly. So, most of them, I interjected, and that got just the slimmest hint of a smile. Most of them, he agreed. I asked him here so he might be able to shed some light on the situation that you may or may not have been witness to. Terry extended a hand, and I shook it with only minor trepidation. So, why don't you enlighten us and tell us what exactly it was you saw? I started out telling them the story that I had told my boss. Some people had broken in, they had chased me out, and it had all been very scary, and I had hidden in the maintenance closet. When I was done, the two of them looked at each other, and it was pretty clear they didn't believe a word of it. Okay, Greg said before he took a sip of his drink. Now, why don't you tell us what really happened? I sighed. Okay, so I told them what I had experienced again, but this time I told them about the mural and how the images had gone away when the natives had chased me into the closet. It was weird, I told him, as the bartender brought over another drink for me. I didn't realize what they were until it was almost too late. I just thought I was hearing mall sounds that I wasn't used to. When I started seeing shadows, I almost dismissed it as my imagination. It's a good thing you didn't, Greg said. Otherwise, you'd be just another statistic. How many people has the mall claimed? I asked, taking a sip of my PBR. 15 in all, Greg said, though most of them were before the 9 o'clock curfew. The mall claimed 9 guests, 4 maintenance men, 2 security guards. You've heard about the security head they found in the fountain, I suppose. Not until today, I said. Mr. Martin told me about it, though I think He meant for it to be cautionary. Terry laughed, and it caught me by surprise. I'd almost forgotten he was there. Of course he would. That old crow's been squatting on that carrion pile for a long time. He picked the land up at an auction for next to nothing, and then put that multi-million-dollar monstrosity on top of the graves beneath it. Terry's family should have owned that land, but they were displaced, you see, and the government took it. They stole it, Terry shouted, drawing some attention from the bar. They stole it from us, just like everything else. It should have been given to us when we left the reservation, but instead they sold it to that trickster. We used to protest outside the mall, but then they trespassed us from the grounds, and now we can't come within 100 feet of it. We wanted that land so we could set up housing for our displaced people. Instead, they threw up that monument to opulence. It makes me sick. Terry has been trying to petition for the return of their land ever since they built that mall. Martin says he's willing to sell it to the tribe, but he's asking way too much for it. The tribe can't get that sort of money together, and he knows it. So he gets to look sorrowful and philanthropic while still making a pile of money. If you hate him so much, why do you work for him? I asked. And Greg shrugged. Because, like you, I also have bills to pay. Terry called for another, and I started to notice a small collection of glasses in front of him. He and Greg had clearly been here for a while. The man's face was beginning to darken with color, and it was pretty clear that the conversation and the alcohol weren't mixing well. He's a snake in the grass. He knew he could get rid of us because he spends a lot of money in Kawakala and has friends on the council. That's why I don't blame Cleary for what he did. It's a fitting punishment for what that snake did to us. He looked up guiltily then and turned back to his cup as if he had said something that he shouldn't have. Who's Cleary? I asked, looking back at Greg. Greg shot Terry a look like he needed to watch his mouth. Cleary was a local artist. His family went and hid in the hills with some of the other families when the people came to take them to the reservation, and he's part of the earliest group of protesters. He drew beautifully, and when the mall started coming under fire, he was hired to paint the mural in the food court. You're kidding me, I said. I assumed that was some kind of joke or something. They made all the natives look like savages. Terry looked like he was getting mad, but I blundered ahead. No disrespect, but you know what I mean. They all have these big, creepy grins, and they kind of look like cannibals in an old novel. That thing, it used to give me nightmares as a kid. It was supposed to, Terry insisted. It was supposed to make you scared. These were the proud warriors that stood against the westward expansionists, and now they look out over the fruits of his labor. He spat into his beer bottle. Mr. Martin hired Cleary because he thought it would help smooth things over with the local tribes. If one of their own was making art in the mall, then it might show a little solidarity. But Cleary had other ideas. But that wasn't all of it, Terry cut in. Cleary was someone who believed in the old ways, the ways of our ancestors, the ways they used to keep the settlers from feeling comfortable. He grunted as Greg kicked him under the bar, and I sighed as I decided I'd had enough of this pussyfooting. If they had invited me out here to tell me old stories, then I was ready to get this over with. Why did you invite me out here? Clearly it isn't just to hear my story, so why did you need me here? The two of them looked at each other, and I could almost feel the silent conversation between them. There's a problem, and we wanted to know what you knew before we brought it up, Greg said. You would have thought we were crazy if we started talking about murals and spirits, if you thought a bunch of kids broke in for some vandalism. We need you to understand what you could be getting into if you help us. Like, really understand. I nodded. Okay. If it helps establish the safety of the mall, then I'm always willing to help. Greg nodded, looked at Terry, who seemed to have suddenly lost his voice, and continued. The protesters are not content to limit their protesting to the town square. They've been trespassed from the mall, but they've always seen it as an insult to their people. Some of the younger protesters have been talking about breaking away from the pack so they can vandalize the mall. They want to get in after dark so they can damage buildings and disrupt trade. They think it'll push Martin to sell the land when his ventures begin to fall apart. I nodded a bit. So the spirits won't hurt them, will they? Terry looked up, some of the anger leaking out of him. The spirits in the mall aren't worried about who's in there and who isn't. They simply come out and menace those inside. We don't know why it's only at night. Neither did Cleary, but if they break into the mall, the spirits will hurt them too. We've tried to talk them out of this, but they're set on their course. They won't even tell us when they plan to do it. That's why we need your help. Why me? I asked. Why not go to Phil or the police? Craig scoffed. The police just think we're trying to stir up trouble, or even more infuriating, that we're prank callers. Phil doesn't think it's an issue and doesn't seem to be taking me very seriously. I'd talked to Mr. Martin, but we suspect he would act in a similar manner. These are our young people. We need to protect them. If you talk to Phil, he might take it seriously. He likes you. He respects you. And he might manage to do something if you can convince him to talk to the police. Maybe they'll take it seriously, too. I sat back, feeling the condensation slide down the bottle in my hand. How had I gotten mixed up in all this? It seemed like my spontaneous decision to stay till my paperwork was done and let me glimpse something that I would have been better off not knowing. And now I was stuck between helping and ignoring a threat to my job. I had agreed to protect them all, after all, and if this was real, then, well, it was a substantial threat. You know, if they catch them in the mall, the cops are going to arrest them, I said, trying one more attempt to weasel out. Terry looked stricken, but Greg only shrugged. Better jail than dead. If the spirits catch them in there, then they'll do more than lock them up. My nephew, Terry's son, is one of those kids talking about breaking in. I'd be real sad to have to bail him out, but I'd be even sadder to have to attend his funeral. You've seen them. You know what they're capable of. We just want you to talk to Phil about it. Maybe bring it up to Mr. Martin. After that, we can... But the bar door slammed open then, and someone came frantically inside. The bartender asked him where the fire was, but when he saw Terry, he made a beeline for him. The two had a quiet conversation, Terry getting a little louder as it went on. And when he spoke to Greg, the older man looked stricken. Looks like we might be out of time. Come on, we might need your help. What's going on? I asked, getting up despite my misgivings. They aren't waiting anymore, it seems. They're heading to Kawakala Mall right now. They opted to take my car, since it would be quicker. I'd gone from having a beer in a dive bar to flying down the road at about 65. I'd never been farther from feeling drunk in my life, and the realization that I was about to head back into the hornet's nest was a sobering one. I pulled out my bag phone, the one I kept in my car for emergencies, and started trying to remember the numbers to important people. First came the police, but they were less helpful than expected. Kawakala Sheriff's Department, how can I help you? Yes, hi. I'm a security guard at the Kawakala Mall. There's a large group of people trying to break in. I need some officers to... But she cut me off. Wow, that's a new one. You're like the fourth one that's called in the last 20 minutes. The joke's wearing thin, kid. I stared at the handset as she hung up on me, shaking my head a little. I suppose I hadn't been the only person to call. Maybe some of the other tribal members had called to see if they could nip this one in the bud before it took root. Okay, the police weren't going to help. I needed to move on to my next resource. My hand shook as I dialed Phil's number. Phil would believe me. He had to. And as it rang and rang, I began to wonder if I'd caught him at a bad time. Maybe he already knew. Surely the mall didn't have a security system. The spirits would set it off, wouldn't they? I realized I knew very little about this situation, and that it might be handled even now. If they'd set off the security system, then the protesters could have scattered already. This could be over before it started. Maybe Phil was on the phone with the alarm company. When he picked up on the 6th ring, I wasn't sure whether I was relieved or not. Who the hell is calling at 10 o'clock at night? I got work in the mornings. This better be important. Mr. Garvis, get to the mall as quick as you can. Something's going on. Kid, what the hell are you doing calling me? Sir, I need you to get to the mall. Protesters are breaking in and are going to get themselves hurt. I could hear him breathing heavily as he weighed what I was saying. And then he started to chuckle a little. Oh, that. Yeah, Greg told me about that. It's just hearsay, kid. Nothing to worry about. Get some rest. We need you back at it tomorrow. They're breaking in right now, sir. I'm watching them do it. We both know that the vandalism isn't the worst part of this situation, and that 10 or so dead kids from the local tribe is going to look really bad on the news. The police seem to think I'm joking. I need help before these kids get hurt. Call Mr. Martin, call the sheriff, call the National Guard if you need to, but these kids are going to die if whatever it is that's in there gets a hold of them. That shut him up pretty quickly. I thought you didn't see anything last night. I lied. I didn't want to sound crazy when I started talking about Indians chasing me. Please, help me out here. I turned the wheel a little harder than I meant to, my car squealing as it took the curve on two wheels, and it took Mr. Garvis less than 10 seconds to make his decision. Don't go inside, and stop as many people as you can from going inside. I'll be on my way. Where's the break-in? I looked in the back seat, and Terry mouthed, food court. The food court. Gotcha. Sit tight. I'll have help there soon. Then he hung up, and I was left with nothing but me, Terry, Greg, and a big mess that we were on the way to. He's not gonna make it in time, Terry half whispered. Hell, we might not even make it in time. We have to try, I said, slowing down a little as we came into the home stretch. I didn't want to get pulled over by a cop who was only doing his job and have to explain why I was doing 65 in a 45-mile zone. Kid, Greg said, and it sounded like he'd been choosing his words for a while, you don't have to come in with us. Terry and I have skin in the game, but you don't have to throw yourself into the mix. If you want to wait for the cavalry to come, I understand, but I've got to try to help them, even if it gets me arrested when the police arrive. It's a little late for that, I said, cursing under my breath as I missed my turn and had to pull a Yui in the middle of the road. I'm in this now, like it or not, so you might as well get used to the idea. We drove in silence for a moment, me watching for cops as I goosed it up a little bit. What makes the spirits come to the mall anyway? I asked suddenly, glancing back at Terry. Is it because it's a burial ground or something? Terry blew out a breath. It is, and it isn't. There's been a lot of bad energy around this site for a while. Hikers used to go missing in the area. Kids out looking for a place to smooch would get the bejesus scared out of them. People out for a late-night drive would say they saw spectral figures, but really it was Cleary that materialized them. He used some kind of old ritual, something he'd had from generations ago, and he brought the spirits in the painting to life. He intended for people to die. He meant for people to get hurt, and he got his wish. How do we stop it then? I asked, seeing the mall coming into sight. We have to find the totem he used to... Terry thought about how to put it and finally just shrugged. Hold it all together, I suppose. How does it work? Maybe if I can find it, I can stop it before too many people get hurt. Totem could be anything. But it'll be close to the mural. The totem's like a conduit. It helps make a connection between the earth, the spirits, and the medium, the mural. You'll need to interrupt that connection, and it should stop them from coming back. If we knew what it was, then we'd have gone in and done it by now. Speak for yourself, Terry said, but flinched back as Greg fixed him with a withering look. Mark is about to go face to face with our past, Terry. Are you saying you wouldn't have stopped that if you could? Terry didn't say anything, but the message was pretty clear. I thought about it as we drove. So, it definitely has to be close to the mural, right? Correct, Greg said, as we pulled around the Dillards and headed for the food court. The only thing near the mural was the food court and Mr. Martin's office. Mr. Martin had his office at the top of the mural, technically. If something like that was going to be somewhere, I supposed Mr. Martin's office was a good place to start. I had been all over the mall, and I hadn't seen anything like that anywhere. I started to ask, not really sure I wanted an answer. Could it be inside the mural? Like in the wall somewhere? Could be, Greg said, but I doubt it would be. The wall is thick, and the food court was one of the first places they built when the construction started. Unless Cleary was long gaming, I can't see it being in the wall. He did give him that urn when he was done, Terry suddenly put in, and we both looked back at him like we'd forgotten he was there. What urn? Greg asked, craning back so we could look at him. When he finished the mural, he handed Mr. Martin an urn, a hand-baked urn that his daughter or niece or something had made. He said he hoped it could be a bridge for healing between his people and the people of the town. But I remember that smile he gave when he gave it to him. It's a bridge, all right, but not for healing. I bet you anything that's what you're looking for. What do you think the odds are that he kept it in his office? I asked as we rounded the corner and saw the doors to the food court. I never got my answer. The scene we wandered up on was pretty awful, and as I put it in park, we snapped to a halt, all of us just staring at it for a while. They'd pried the doors open with a crowbar, and then they had likely poured in and gotten to helling. The ones coming out now, however, didn't look like they had helling on their minds. They were cut, some of them bleeding freely, and they were scattered in a mass of jeans and t-shirts. We got out, a tire half on the sidewalk, and Greg reached out for one of them as he came running past. The kid couldn't be older than 17, and he had a cut on his cheek that was going to make a hell of a scar. Luckily, it appeared he was going to get to keep the eye, though. Nathan, Greg said, shaking the boy a little until he turned to look at him. What happened? I don't know, Uncle. We got in, and then we started breaking things. We were laughing and joking, and then all of a sudden, we were under attack. They looked like warriors, all deerskin and painted faces, and they just hit us. Some of us ran, some of us tried to fight, and some of us are dead. I ran. They felt wrong, Unc. They felt like they were made of bees. Poor kid was shaking all over. Greg let him go so he could run away. Last chance to bail out, kid, Greg said, but I was already heading for the door. I'd come too far to turn back now. I stepped over the broken glass and was glad that I'd worn my work shoes. The glass broke loudly underfoot, and I had intended to reach back to help Greg and Terry before I caught sight of the interior. The spirits hadn't gotten to them quickly enough, it would seem. because the food court was a mess of broken glass and spilled garbage. I heard Greg whistle behind me, and I was guessing this was the worst mess he had seen in the food court. The smell was tremendous. Whatever prep had been done for the next day was now all over the floor, and mingling smells made me want to throw up. It was slippery, my shoes sliding in the muck as we tried to make our way into the mall, and Terry had to reach out and grab a post before he fell on his butt. If you've never smelled something like this, it's kind of like a dumpster full of old food left in the sun. It was made all the worse by the lingering smell of copper that permeated it, too. The sauce and the liquid ran together with the blood that was leaking from many of the protesters. Not all of them were dead, but quite a few of them were. They were laid out on tables and leaning against walls, but some of them were stiller than living people should be. Terry gasped as he tried to go to a few of them, but he had to grab the post as he slipped in the mess. The floor was like a miasma of broken furniture, so one false move would send him stumbling into a soy sauce punji pit. "Go on," Greg said. "We'll try to get help. If you find Marcus, tell him to come back to the food court. We'll get the others out of here once we clear a path." I nodded, making my way carefully across the food court as I heard them make their way to the custodian office to get some tools. It was like navigating an oil slick. I could feel my feet sliding, threatening to come out from under me, and the farther in I went, the more screaming I could hear. Someone was being attacked or murdered, and the sooner I found the totem that was anchoring the painting to the mall, the sooner I could stop all of this. The people on the floor had long slashes on them, jagged cuts that oozed like something living. As I grabbed one of the tables so I didn't bust my ass, I saw one of them creeping up on me. The mess on the floor didn't seem to slow him down, and his grin was highly predatory. He had a knife in one hand, his arms and chest bare and slashed with blood that I doubted was his own, and his feet came down quietly on the messy floor. My breath hitched a little as I watched him creep closer, my doom creeping along with him. My feet slid as I tried to get out of his line of sight. The spirit just kept coming with that horror movie slowness, and I wanted to scream as I fumbled around. I was going to die. This thing was going to kill me, and it felt like a colossal waste to have come this far to lose to a grease trap or a turned-over container of sauce. He was less than 20 feet away from me when I heard the water, and as it came frothing from behind the Chick-fil-A, I could see that someone had smashed the nozzle of a drop sink. The water became a stream and then a small river, and as it pushed the muck away, I could also see the spirit pause and take a step back. His smile was still in place, but now he seemed hesitant to cross the stream. "Go!" yelled Greg, and I could see a bloody kid leaning against his shoulder. "Spirits can't cross running water. Hurry up before he regroups." My footing was still extremely tenuous, but I managed to get moving as the water carved a path between us. The office wasn't far, but I could see other shadows stalking me as I went. They were hurting me, moving me like a deer into a trap, and as the office door came into sight, I could see them getting ready to spring. There were 5 of them, their faces mostly hidden by shadow, and I could see only a slim chance of making it into the office. My shoes weren't completely dry, and it saved my life. As I scrambled for the door, my shoe slipped on the tile, and I went down on my chest as they made their move. Somehow they moved right over the top of me. It was weird, feeling them come within a hair's breadth of stabbing me to death, and as a pair of them crashed into a couple of tables, I reached for the door and threw it open. It came back together very quickly as I put my weight against it, and I started looking for something to jam under it. The 2 that jumped over me must have got back on their feet pretty quickly, because suddenly it was like a machine gun was hitting the outside of the door. I engaged the lock, but that wasn't going to last forever. Finally, I found a rickety-looking chair at the bottom of the stairs and slammed it up under the knob. It was like putting silly putty in a hole on a dam, but it was all I had. As the door bucked and thrashed, I took the stairs 2 at a time. I needed to get this totem and destroy it before the spirits got through and put those barbaric knives to good use on my flesh. To my surprise, the office at the top of the stairs was open, and I went straight in and locked the door behind me. To my continued surprise, someone was standing at the window and looking down at the carnage. It was Mr. Martin, and he turned around with a look that said he believed his life was about to end. "What are you doing here?" he asked, stepping away from the window. "Me? What are you doing here?" I shot back. "Young man, this is my office. I'm allowed to be here." "No, actually you aren't. Don't you remember? You told me that no one was allowed to be here after 9 p.m. I believe you said you would fire me if you caught me here past 9 o'clock again. So I'll reiterate. What are you doing here?" Mr. Martin looked like he wanted to get mad, looked like he wanted to blister at me on the spot, but he seemed to remember that we were standing over a powder keg and adjusted his tone accordingly. "I was doing paperwork, much like you were the other night, and told security they could go on home and that I would lock up at 9. When I went to lock up at 9 o'clock, I saw this group of hellions out in the parking lot and decided it might be safer to hide from the natives than fight the mob. So I locked the door and ran, hiding in my office. I assumed they would wreck up the place and then probably get killed by the spirits, but then you had to barge in and ruin my hiding place." I was speechless. "Did it not occur to you to call the police?" Mr. Martin smiled, but it was extremely patronizing. "Oh, of course not. Why would that have occurred to me? Of course I tried to call the police. It seems that whatever these young men were planning, their council of elders tried to call the police and nip it in the bud already. However, the cops didn't take it seriously, and when I told them about the group of children trying to get into my mall, they laughed at me and hung up." I nodded. "That's what they did to me, too. So you've been hiding up here?" Mr. Martin sneered at me. "I'm not hiding. I was being smart. It appeared you had the same idea." I was already looking around as he spoke, trying to find the totem or whatever it was I was looking for. "No, I'm actually looking for something." Mr. Martin looked up slowly. "In my office?" I sighed. I'd have to tell him. "Look, I've got some information that might stop the natives from coming back again. We have to break something that's connecting the artist's intention to the art piece. And it's something he gave you when the piece was completed." I elaborated a little, trying to make it as quick as I could, and as I laid it all out, I became aware that the thumping at the base of the stairs had stopped. That could mean they had given up, but it could also mean that they'd broken through my small barricade and were creeping up the stairs to find their quarry. I turned suddenly and locked the door, before turning back to find Mr. Martin smirking, but not at the story, to my surprise. He honestly seemed to be taking it all quite well, and I thought he might believe a lot of what I was saying. "So, we need to find this totem that Cleary gave me when he finished the art piece and smash it. That's what they tell me. I don't know how, but it will supposedly sever the connection and stop the natives from coming back again." Mr. Martin nodded and started opening drawers on his desk. "I keep it in here. Always kind of meant to make a display out of it or something. I know it's here somewhere. I just need to..." The door rattled in the frame as something hit it hard enough to send dust motes falling from the ceiling tiles. I started looking for things to push against the door as it jounced again. In the end, when the filing cabinet wouldn't budge and the end table was too flimsy, I put my back against the door and did my best to hold them at bay. It felt like a small army was pressing against the metal, and I could see the frame bulging as they set their shoulders to the task. "Hurry!" I shouted, wincing as something poked through the door and pricked me. Mr. Martin was yanking the drawers out now, spilling papers and pens all over the floor. A calculator went flying, as did a bunch of paper clips. And suddenly, he was out of drawers and looking pale. I was sure I put it in the desk," he breathed, looking under it like it might have fallen down. I couldn't have told you why until right now, but it always seemed important, like something I should keep close." He crawled out from under the front of the desk, and his hair was sticking up in frantic corkscrews. The door wasn't going to last much longer at this rate, and I winced again as more than a poke hit me in the back. They were cutting through the wood now, those stone tools feeling very real as they came closer and closer to poking into me. And when I saw Mr. Martin staring at the shelf beside the filing cabinet, I hoped he had found what he was looking for. "It's here!" he half shouted, half squeaked, and lunged for it as he spilled over the bottom two shelves. I saw him lift up a lumpy earthen pot about the size of a baseball, and then he brought it down with a note of finality as it shattered against the short carpet. He stomped on it for good measure, and as it broke and scattered, I felt a sudden and immediate halt to the force that was trying to push its way into the room. I leaned against the door a little longer, not trusting it, but it was like the ghosts had been exorcised from the place. The air was lighter, the room less constricting, and as I eased off the door and peeked at the gap around the ill-fitting thing, I couldn't see anything lurking in the shadows. Kawakala Mall was just a mall now, and it was nice to be alone inside it. Mr. Martin collapsed on the floor of his office, breathing heavily and staring at the ceiling. And that was where Phil found both of us, a half hour later. It felt like no time to either of us, but apparently we had just been listing there in the aftermath. He got us downstairs again so the EMS could have a look at us, and then the shitstorm truly began. The aftermath of the Kawakala Mall break-in was pretty wild. 8 kids had died that night, but Marcus wasn't one of them. He had pulled a couple of his friends into a walk-in cooler at the Chinese place and barred the door, but the rest hadn't been so lucky. Even those who had escaped had some pretty substantial injuries. They tried to sue, I heard, but they had broken in and vandalized the mall, so it didn't go real well for them. Kawakala Mall rebranded itself as Pine Meadows Mall, and Mr. Martin had a long talk with Greg and Terry about what had happened with the mural. They decided to be a little more open to community outreach, and the survivors were allowed to help clean the mall as opposed to going to jail. Mr. Martin also started a few charities with the local tribes and talked to the city council about rebranding some of their town traditions. The protests have lessened, and the general air of chaos has gone down quite a bit. Now, the mall stays open late. People come in to shop, the movie theater runs all-night screenings sometimes, and Pine Meadows Mall is a community staple. At least it was, until 2020 when everything kind of shut down due to COVID. The mall is bouncing back, but it's not as big or as full as it used to be. I was head of the mall security until COVID, and now I'm retired. I still go to Pine Meadows sometimes, but I still can't look at that mural without getting a shiver. The mall may be changed, but I still remember when the natives were restless and their hunting went on all night. So if you come to Pine Meadows Mall, formerly Kawakala Mall, remember to be respectful. Who knows what other spirits might be waiting to take their turn.